The ancient wilderness of Judea is a place where life is stripped down to its barest, most brutal essentials. Beneath a heavy sky saturated with the suffocating heat of the desert, the canyons wind like deep, jagged gashes through the earth. It is a landscape of white dust, sharp flint, and long predatory shadows, and it is here, in the suffocating darkness of a hidden cavern, that we find the Shepherd King. He is a warrior whose name was once shouted in triumph by dancing multitudes, but tonight he is a man hunted. The royal robes are replaced by dust-stained tunics. The harp that once calmed the madness of a monarch now sits silent against the cold stone. Kneeling in the dirt, his hands pressed hard against his weary face, he lets the hot tears fall into the dust. The weight of an entire nation's betrayal rests heavily upon his slumped shoulders. The burden is too massive to bear alone, and in the agonizing stillness of the cave, he lifts his eyes toward the unseen heavens and cries out with a voice fractured by raw sorrow. How have they increased? How have the adversaries multiplied so rapidly, sprouting from the earth like noxious weeds after a torrential rain? It feels as though the very rocks he walks upon have turned against him, as though the whispers of treason have infected the wind itself. It is not just the foreign empires that seek his demise, it is his own flesh and blood, his trusted counselors, and the very citizens he bled to protect. They have risen up in a coordinated wave of hostility, a wall of human wrath closing in from every horizon. The physical exhaustion of the endless flight is nothing compared to the psychological terror of watching yesterday's allies become today's executioners. Every rustle of dry brush outside the cave entrance sounds like the footstep of an assassin. Every gust of wind carries the phantom echo of a closing trap. Many are saying of my soul there is no deliverance for him in God. This is the sharpest dagger of all the spiritual taunt of the crowd. The multitudes are standing on the ridges looking down into the valleys where he hides, nodding their heads in cruel certainty. They have looked at his circumstances, measured his isolation, and concluded that even the Creator has abandoned him. They declare that his past sins have finally caught up with him, that his lineage is cursed, and that his story will end in ignorance and blood. The enemy does not merely want to destroy his physical frame. They want to assassinate his hope. They want to convince his fragile mind that the line of communication between his soul and the throne of heaven has been permanently severed. Yet within the bruised chest of the believer, a miraculous transformation begins to take place. The suffocating environment of the cavern does not crush the remaining embers of his faith. Instead, it compresses them into a brilliant, unyielding diamond of absolute certainty. He refuses to allow the narrative of the mocking crowd to dictate the reality of his soul. He takes a deep, ragged breath, plants his knees firmly upon the bedrock, and speaks into the darkness with a tone that shifts from a desperate lament into a defiant declaration of allegiance. You, O sovereign provider, are a shield around me. You are not merely a buckler held in front to ward off a single arrow. You are a complete fortress, enveloping my entire being, protecting my back from the hidden betrayer, guarding my flanks from the rushing horde, and covering my head from the blazing heat of malice. Let the armies of the world boast of their chariots and their finely forged iron weapons. Let them trust in their strategic alliances and their overwhelming numbers. My armor is not made of bronze or steel. My armor is the invisible, invincible presence of the living Creator. The warrior remembers who he is. He is not a permanent fugitive destined to die like a wild beast in a hole. The Almighty is his glory, the divine force that restores his true identity when the world attempts to cover him in shame. In moments of profound discouragement, when the weight of the trial forces his eyes down toward the dirt of defeat, it is the gentle hand of his heavenly Father that reaches down to lift his head high. With that celestial touch, his gaze is redirected away from the terrifying numbers of the enemy and fixed firmly upon the eternal majesty of the throne. He stands to his feet, the shadows of the cave retreating before the inner light of his renewed conviction. What do you think we want to hear from you? When you face overwhelming opposition in your own life, what promises from the Psalms do you cling to for strength? How do you keep your faith alive when the voices around you say that help will never come? Leave your thoughts, prayers, and personal stories in the comments below. Your words might be the exact encouragement someone else needs today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss part 2 of this transformative journey through the Psalms. The relentless echoes of the mocking crowds continue to drift through the jagged ravines, carrying a venom that seeks to dissolve the final remnants of human endurance. Out in the blinding glare of the wilderness, the host of the adversary swells with every passing hour, their armor glinting beneath a merciless sun. They gather on the limestone ridges, looking down into the labyrinth of canyons, with the cold patience of vultures waiting for a fallen beast. To them, the isolated shepherd king, hiding in the subterranean gloom, is already a footnote in history, a discarded instrument stripped of divine favor. Their conversations are filled with arrogant laughter, declaring that his destiny is sealed and that the heavens have sealed their ears against his groans. They count his remaining allies on a single hand, tracking his faltering steps with the absolute certainty that he will soon stumble into their waiting snares. Inside the deep recesses of the earth, the suffocating pressure of the environment begins to produce an altogether different result. The heavy atmosphere of the cavern does not crush the inner spirit of the petitioner. Instead, it acts as a crucible, refining his perspective until the physical reality of the surrounding armies begins to pale in comparison to the eternal architecture of the cosmos. He stands fully erect now, his back braced against the cold, unyielding granite wall of the cave. The trembling in his hands has ceased, replaced by a steady, quiet strength that flows from a source completely independent of his immediate circumstances. He closes his eyes to shut out the physical limitations of his stone prison, opening the internal eyes of his spirit to behold a grander courtroom. I call out to the Creator with my voice, and the answer descends from the holy mountain. He speaks into the darkness, not with the frantic desperation of a victim, but with the measured authority of a covenant partner. His voice, though low, possesses a resonant weight that seems to vibrate through the very foundations of the mountain. He knows with an absolute, unshakable certainty that his plea does not scatter like dust upon the desert wind. It rises through the canopy of the stars, penetrating the celestial veil to enter the true sanctuary of the Most High. The answer does not delay. It moves swiftly down the slopes of the sacred peak, carrying an unnatural, profound tranquility that blankets his anxious thoughts. The chaotic noise of the world outside is suddenly muffled by a supernatural silence, a holy stillness that reclaims his mind from the borders of panic. In an act of supreme defiance against his current crisis, the weary warrior lowers himself onto the rough ground. Surrounded by thousands of active threats and hidden assassins, he deliberately chooses to surrender his vigilance. He extends his body upon the earth, cushions his head upon his dust-stained arm, and closes his eyes. This is not the sleep of exhaustion or apathy. It is the ultimate expression of radical trust. He relinquishes control of his survival, placing the safekeeping of his life entirely into the hands of the unseen guardian. Throughout the long watch of the night, while his enemies scheme beneath the stars and plan their morning assault, the king rests as peacefully as a child in a sanctuary. When the first pale rays of dawn pierce the entrance of the cavern, painting the stone walls in hues of amber and crimson, the king opens his eyes. He draws a deep, clean breath into his lungs, feeling the immediate surge of physical renewal. He has awakened safely, untouched by the hand of violence, because the eternal architect has actively sustained his life through the perilous hours of darkness. The simple act of waking up becomes a profound theological proof, a living demonstration that the power of his protector is active, vigilant, and completely uncompromised by the strategies of men. The fear that once threatened to paralyze his footsteps has completely evaporated, replaced by a bold, unyielding fortitude. Even if 10,000 soldiers deploy in perfect battle lines, extending their ranks to encircle his position on every horizon, his resolve will not fracture. He will not look at the gleam of their spears or the numbers of their banners with a spirit of dread. He knows that human strength is a temporary vapor, an illusion that dissolves when the true sovereign arises to balance the scales of equity. He steps toward the mouth of the cave, looking out over the expansive, sun-bleached desert with the posture of a conqueror, ready to witness the manifestation of divine justice. Rise up, O Lord, and deliver me, my protector, for the hour of judgment has arrived. The tone of his prayer shifts from a quiet meditation into a powerful command for cosmic intervention. He calls upon the ultimate judge to shatter the arrogance of the oppressors, to strike the jaws of the predators who have hunted the innocent without cause. He prays that the sharp tearing teeth of wickedness be broken into pieces, rendered completely powerless to inflict further harm upon the vulnerable. This is not a cry for personal vengeance born of human malice. It is a solemn appeal for the restoration of moral order in a world fractured by treachery. It is the recognition that true law and ultimate authority belong solely to the Creator, whose righteousness must eventually sweep away the structures of deceit. The petitioner stands at the boundary where the shadow of the cave meets the brilliant light of the new day. He understands that final victory cannot be manufactured by human strategy, nor can it be secured by the sharpness of a sword. Deliverance is an unmerited gift that flows directly from the throne of grace, an unchangeable decree that brings order out of chaos and vindicates the upright in heart. He lifts his arms toward the sky, pronouncing a blessing over the wider community of faith, praying that the divine favor that has preserved his life in the secret places will cascade over the entire nation, anchoring them in peace for generations to come. Share your reflections below. The story of the cave is a mirror for our own spiritual journeys. We want to know how these truths resonate in your life today. What does it look like for you to lie down and sleep in the middle of a personal storm? How do you practically practice that level of surrender? In your own experience, how has the completed Creator lifted your head when the voices of discouragement were at their loudest? The first rays of the morning light bleed over the rugged summits of the mountains, signaling a new dawn for the one who dwells within the secret place of the Most High. As the darkness of the night retreats, the Shepherd King stands at the threshold of the cave to lift his voice toward the heavens. This is not a time of frantic panic, but a intentional moment of orientation. The chaos of the previous night, filled with the whispers of assassins and the looming threat of betrayal, begins to dissolve under the steady gaze of the Creator. He speaks to the Lord with a clarity that only comes through the discipline of absolute reliance. Consider my lament, he prays, knowing that every word is heard by the King who sits upon the eternal throne. He does not bring a message of confusion or doubt. Instead, he lays his requests before the divine presence with the patient expectation of a man who knows that his God is not pleased with wickedness. He understands that evil people are not welcome in the sacred courts, nor can the arrogant stand in the presence of the Holy One. There is a deep theological realization washing over his soul. The Lord detests the bloodthirsty and the deceitful. This knowledge acts as an anchor for his emotions. He knows that his cause is aligned with the justice of the heavens, while his enemies have aligned themselves with the shadows of the void. The transition from the depths of the night to the clarity of the morning is a fundamental pattern for the life of faith. The believer declares that by the great love of the Creator, he has access to enter the house of the Lord. In profound reverence, he bows toward the holy temple, aligning his heart with the rhythms of heaven. This is the posture of the righteous, a humble submission that recognizes the absolute holiness of the one who protects him. Lead me, Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies, he petitions. He is not asking for a sudden removal of the threat, but for the clarity of path and the strength of character to walk that path without stumbling. He understands that the best way to handle the presence of an enemy is to ensure that his own way is made straight before the gaze of God. The reality of his foes remains, but their influence over his spirit has been fundamentally broken. He describes the mouths of his adversaries with brutal honesty. Not a word from their mouth can be trusted, he observes, for their heart is filled with malice. He paints a graphic portrait of their internal condition, noting that their throat is an open grave. They are architects of ruin, using their tongues to construct webs of lies that trap the unsuspecting. He calls upon the judge of all the earth to declare them guilty, letting their own wicked intrigues serve as the mechanism of their downfall. He prays that they be banished for their many sins, for their rebellion is directed not just at him, but at the divine order that he represents. Yet as he contemplates the judgment that will surely fall upon the deceitful, his focus shifts back to the shelter he has found in the Lord. But let all who take refuge in you be glad, he exclaims, with a heart that is beginning to overflow with joy. This joy is not a fickle emotion tied to the absence of trouble. It is a profound, steady state of being rooted in the protection of the Almighty. He envisions a sanctuary where the faithful can ever sing for joy. This is the ultimate hope of the righteous, that the divine protection will be spread over them like a canopy, allowing those who love the name of the Lord to rejoice in his presence regardless of the noise of the world outside. Surely, Lord, you bless the righteous, he concludes, bringing his morning prayer to a triumphant peak. You surround them with your favor as with a shield. This image of the shield is central to his survival. It is not a static object, but a living, active grace that moves as he moves, covers him when he is exposed, and deflects the arrows of accusation that fly from the tongues of the wicked. He realizes that while his enemies think they are the ones with the power to destroy, the reality is that he is the one who carries the impenetrable protection of heaven. This morning reflection leads him into a deeper meditation on the nature of sanctuary. When the foundations of the world seem to be shaking, when the structures of justice appear to be crumbling, the righteous often feel the temptation to flee to the mountains, seeking safety in physical isolation. The enemies of the king might mock him, suggesting that he flee like a bird to the high rocks, thinking that his ruin is imminent. But he rejects the urge to panic. He affirms that the Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord is on his heavenly throne. His eyes observe everyone on earth, and his gaze examines the heart of every human. The Lord does not merely watch from a distance, he acts as a righteous examiner. He loves justice, and the upright will see his face. This is the promise that sustains the shepherd king through every trial. While the wicked plot their violence, the Creator sees it all. He knows the secret schemes, the hidden lies, and the arrogant thoughts that dwell within the souls of the boastful. The righteous are not forgotten. They are seen, understood, and preserved. This assurance is the bedrock of his peace. He does not need to scramble for safety, because his safety is guaranteed by the one who founded the heavens and the earth. He moves forward into the day with a heart that is quiet, resolved, and completely anchored in the favor of his protector. The morning sun rises higher over the barren wilderness of Judea, casting sharp shadows across the cracked earth and lighting the limestone cliffs in a brilliant, fiery glow. Within the cavern, the stillness is broken by a deep, intentional breath as the king prepares his heart for the legal battles of the soul. Outside, his pursuers continue their relentless search, their voices echoing off the canyon walls as they track his movements. But inside this rocky fortress, the atmosphere has shifted. The Shepherd King is no longer merely a fugitive running from an earthly army. He has entered the supreme courtroom of the cosmos to present his case before the ultimate judge of the universe. He kneels on the rocky ground, his palms open, and resting on his knees in a posture of complete transparency. He addresses the Lord not out of a spirit of pride, but with a deep, unshakable confidence in the divine standard of equity. "Take up my cause, O Lord," he prays, letting his voice carry the weight of a man who has examined his own conscience and found no hidden treachery. "Save me and deliver me from all who pursue me, or they will tear me apart like a lion, ripping my life to pieces, with no one to rescue me." This is the raw honesty of the spiritual warrior. He does not minimize the danger or pretend the enemy is powerless. He acknowledges the predatory nature of his foes, comparing their fierce rage to the hunting tactics of a starving lion. Yet before he asks for the execution of justice upon his enemies, he opens his own heart to the searchlight of heaven. He invites the divine scrutiny, knowing that true justice must begin with personal alignment. "Lord my God, if I have done this, and there is guilt on my hands, if I have repaid my ally with evil, or without cause, and have robbed my foe, then let my enemy pursue and overtake me." This is a profound moment of spiritual accountability. He refuses to hide behind a mask of self-righteousness. He declares that if he has acted treacherously, if he has broken a sacred bond, or exploited his position to harm an adversary, he is willing to accept the natural consequences of his actions. "Let the enemy trample my life to the ground," he states, "and make me sleep in the dust of defeat." But if innocence guides his steps, if his hands are clean of betrayal, then he calls upon the Creator to rise up in holy indignation. "Arise, Lord, in your anger," he petitions, looking beyond the physical horizon toward the heavenly throne. "Rise up against the rage of my enemies. Awake, my God, and decree the justice that you have established from old." He envisions a magnificent assembly where the peoples of the earth gather in silent awe around the divine dais. He sees the Lord sitting enthroned on high, governing the nations with perfect equity and absolute truth. "Let the Lord judge the peoples," he exclaims. "Vindicate me, Lord, according to my righteousness, according to my integrity." This appeal for vindication is not a claim to absolute moral perfection, but a declaration of functional integrity in the face of false accusations. He knows that his enemies have invented lies to destroy his reputation, using slander to turn the hearts of the people against him. He trusts the righteous God who probes the deepest corridors of the human mind and heart, understanding every hidden motive and uncovering every secret intent. He takes comfort in the reality that his shield is God Most High, who actively preserves and saves the upright in heart. The divine protection is not a random favor, but a consistent attribute of a God who acts as a righteous judge every single day. He contemplates the gravity of divine justice, knowing that those who persist in malice are walking on a treacherous path of their own making. If the wicked do not relent, if they refuse to turn away from their destructive courses, the Creator will sharpen his glittering sword and string his great bow of judgment. The weapons of retribution are already prepared, their flaming arrows aimed at the heart of rebellion. The king observes the spiritual mechanics of wickedness, noting that whoever is pregnant with evil will eventually give birth to complete disillusionment. The troublemakers are caught in the laws of their own sowing and reaping. Whoever digs a hole and scoops it out will inevitably fall into the pit they have constructed for another. The trouble they cause recoils on their own heads, the king declares, watching the conceptual collapse of the enemy's strategy. Their violence comes down on their own crowns, leaving the innocent unharmed and the righteous secure. This realization brings an end to the mourning of his soul, replacing the heavy burden of anxiety with a glorious anthem of praise. I will give thanks to the Lord, because of his righteousness, he proclaims into the dark corners of the cave. I will sing the praises of the name of the Lord Most High. He stands at the mouth of the cavern, looking out at the vast desert landscape, not as a victim hiding from danger, but as a cleared man standing in the victory of a celestial verdict. Share your reflections below. The heavenly courtroom is always open to those who walk in integrity. We want to hear how these timeless principles speak to your life today. How do you maintain your personal integrity and keep your hands clean when you are being unfairly attacked or slandered by others? In what ways have you seen the enemy's plots backfire in your own life, proving that trouble eventually recoils on the wicked? The blazing midday sun turns the wilderness of Judea into an oven of shimmering heat, but inside the deep limestone crevice, the shepherd king remains anchored in a completely different reality. He has crossed a threshold in his spiritual journey. The voices of the thousands who seek his life have not ceased their shouting, but their clamor no longer penetrates the sanctuary of his mind. Instead of focusing on the horizontal plane of danger, his spirit is pulled upward into a contemplation of the sheer magnitude of the Creator. He looks past the low, jagged ceilings of his stone shelter, setting his sights on the vast blueprint of the heavens. O Lord, our sovereign master, how majestic is your name in all the earth. He speaks these words with a profound sense of awe, feeling his own insignificance dissolve into the grandeur of the divine. He recognizes that the Almighty has set his glory far above the physical heavens, weaving his majesty into the very fabric of the cosmos. The king muses on the striking paradox of divine power. It is not through the sophisticated weapons of empires or the complex strategies of military generals that the Creator establishes his ultimate authority. Instead, it is through the praise of children and infants that the Lord has established a stronghold against his enemies. The simple, uncomplicated trust of the weak is the exact weapon used to silence the arrogant foe and the vengeful accuser. This realization forces the warrior to look at his own fragile existence through the lens of eternity. He steps closer to the edge of the cavern, looking up at the expansive sky that stretches across the wilderness like a brilliant blue canopy. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? What are human beings that you care for them so deeply? He is overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the cosmos, recognizing that the one who flings galaxies into the void is the exact same one who counts the tears of a fugitive running for his life in the desert. The contemplation of human destiny brings a wave of dignity to his weary soul. He remembers the original design of creation, recalling that the architect of life has made humanity a little lower than the heavenly messengers, crowning them with glory and honor. He is reminded that human beings were designed to be wise stewards over the works of the divine hands, with everything placed submissive beneath their feet. He visualizes the vast array of creation, all flocks and herds, the wild beasts of the open fields, the birds that navigate the currents of the sky, and the fish that swim the deep hidden paths of the seas. This is the true identity of the believer, an identity that cannot be stripped away by the decrees of an earthly monarch or the malice of a rebel army. This vision of cosmic order brings a profound peace to his current state of isolation. He looks down at his dust-stained hands and his simple shepherd's staff, realizing that his current status as a wanderer does not diminish his standing in the heavenly court. He is a son of the great king, an heir to a promise that was anchored in eternity long before the mountains were brought forth. The terror of the wilderness begins to look incredibly small when measured against the infinite landscape of divine faithfulness. He stands firmly upon the rocky floor of the cave, his heart echoing the opening refrain of his meditation with a renewed sense of victory. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. The focus of his heart narrows once again, shifting from the wide expanse of the cosmos back to the immediate details of his personal sanctuary. He recognizes that the Creator is not just a distant architect governing the stars. He is an ever-present help in times of trouble. In the Lord I take refuge, he declares, addressing the fears that his companions might whisper in the shadows. How can you say to my soul, flee like a bird to your mountain? He acknowledges the tactical reality that the wicked are bending their bows, setting their sharp arrows against the strings to shoot from the shadows at the upright in heart. He knows the foundations of society appear to be undergoing a systematic destruction, causing the timid to ask what the righteous can possibly do. The answer to that question is found in the unshakable location of the divine presence. The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord is on his heavenly throne. This is the ultimate security of the believer. The earthly structures of power may crumble, rulers may abandon their integrity, and human courts may become corrupted by bribes. But the true seat of universal government remains completely untouched by the chaos of the earth. From this high vantage point, the eyes of the sovereign observe everyone on earth. His gaze thoroughly examines the children of men, testing the righteous and discovering the true motives of the wicked. He contemplates the destiny of those who choose the path of violence, knowing that their apparent prosperity is a brief illusion. The Lord hates those who love cruelty with a passion. Upon the unrepentant workers of iniquity, he will rain fiery coals and burning sulfur, making a scorching wind their ultimate inheritance. This judgment is not born of a volatile temper, but of a pure, unswerving dedication to absolute justice. For the Lord is righteous, the king proclaims, his voice echoing off the limestone walls. He loves justice, and the upright will see his face. This is the ultimate reward of the faithful, to stand in the unclouded light of the divine countenance, fully known, fully vindicated, and completely secure. The sweltering heat of the Judean desert begins to wane as the sun dips lower toward the western horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the valley floor. Inside the hidden sanctuary of the cave, the shepherd king remains deeply locked in spiritual warfare. The conflict he faces is not fought with the clash of bronze shields or the whistling of flying arrows. It is a battle against an invisible flood of deception that has broken loose across the land. From the heights of his temporary refuge, he can hear the distant murmur of the cities and the camps of his pursuers, where truth has become a casualty of political convenience and loyalty has vanished like morning mist. Help, Lord, for no one is faithful anymore. Those who are loyal have vanished from the human race. He lifts his hands in a solemn plea, crying out against the moral decay that threatens to dismantle the spiritual foundations of his nation. He observes with a heavy heart that emptiness and falsehood have become the common currency of social interaction. Everyone lies to their neighbor, he notes, with a voice tinged with grief. They flatter with their lips, but they harbor double hearts and deep deception in their secret thoughts. The king recognizes that a society built on the sand of systemic dishonesty cannot endure. When words lose their meaning and promises are treated as disposable tools for personal gain, the very fabric of human community begins to unravel. The petitioner watches as the boastful and the powerful strut across the stage of history, confident that their eloquence can manipulate any circumstance and shield them from any consequence. He hears the arrogant declarations of those who believe they are accountable to no higher authority. They say, "By our tongues we will prevail, our own lips will defend us. Who is master over us?" This is the ultimate expression of human rebellion, the belief that one can create their own reality through the power of manipulation, completely independent of the eternal standards of truth established by the Creator. They use their speech as a weapon to suppress the vulnerable, building empires of influence on a foundation of empty promises. Yet the cries of the suffering have not gone unnoticed in the high courts of heaven. The Shepherd King shifts his focus from the arrogance of the oppressors to the sudden, powerful intervention of the Almighty. Because the poor are plundered and the needy groan in their affliction, I will now arise, says the Lord. This is the turning point of the struggle. The silent patience of the sovereign is not apathy, it is the gathering of an unstoppable storm of justice. The Creator declares that he will personally step down into the arena of human history to protect the weak from those who malign them, establishing the vulnerable in the safety they long to see. The King takes comfort in the absolute contrast between the deceptive words of men and the unyielding reliability of the divine voice. The words of the Lord are flawless, he proclaims, his voice echoing off the limestone walls of his cavern. They are like silver purified in a crucible, like gold refined 7 times over in the fires of perfect truth. While human promises warp and change with the shifting winds of self-interest, the decrees of the Creator remain completely pure, totally dependable, and entirely free from any trace of deception. Every word spoken by the Almighty is a solid rock upon which a fragile life can safely stand during a time of absolute chaos. This profound realization reshapes his perspective on the current state of his surroundings. He looks out from the mouth of the cave, watching the twilight settle over the wilderness, knowing that the current triumph of evil is merely a temporary illusion. You, Lord, will keep the needy safe, he declares with unshakable confidence. You will protect us forever from the generational cycle of the wicked. He acknowledges the tragic reality that the ungodly freely strut about when what is vile is honored by the human race. He sees that when a culture elevates corruption and celebrates arrogance, the wicked are emboldened to manipulate open fields. But their apparent freedom is merely a march toward their own undoing. The King transitions deeper into a state of quiet worship, recognizing that the sovereign is the ultimate executioner of perfect equity. He refuses to allow the temporary prosperity of the deceitful to dictate the emotional climate of his soul. He centers his thoughts on the unchangeable character of his protector, knowing that the flattery of the wicked will eventually be silenced by the weight of eternal truth. The open graves of their throats will be sealed, and the boastful tongues will be brought to absolute stillness before the throne of judgment. He sits back down in the quiet dusk of the cavern, his spirit completely detached from the panic of the world, entirely resting in the flawless word of his King. The heavy silence of the Judean night settles over the barren landscape like a thick blanket of woven wool. Inside the limestone refuge, the Shepherd King kneels upon the cold floor, his physical exhaustion entirely overshadowed by the vividness of his spiritual sight. He is no longer confined to the narrow walls of a desert cave. In his spirit, he is transported to a realm of absolute awe, standing before the magnificent dais of the eternal sovereign. He envisions the great throne, established above the chaotic waters of the earth, elevated high above the petty squabbles of kings and commanders. This is the ultimate court of cosmic justice, where the noise of earthly battles is swallowed by the profound reverence of the heavenly host. He lifts his voice, echoing a prayer that reverberates through the spiritual dimensions. "Awake, my God," he cries out. "Decree the justice you have ordained from the foundation of the world." He watches as the assembled peoples of the earth are summoned from the rising of the sun to the place where it sets. They gather around the holy mountain in absolute silence, stripped of their military banners, their wealth, and their earthly titles. Here, the arrogant warlords and the deceptive politicians stand on equal footing with the oppressed and the forgotten. The divine sovereign sits enthroned over them on high, radiating a brilliance that exposes every shadow and brings every hidden secret into the piercing light of truth. Standing amidst this vast assembly, the hunted warrior does not cower. He steps forward with the bold confidence of a man whose conscience has been washed clean by sincere repentance and steadfast loyalty. Let the Lord judge the peoples, he declares, asking for a verdict that aligns with the reality of his soul. Vindicate me, Lord, according to my righteousness, according to my integrity. He is not claiming to possess a flawless record devoid of any human failing. Rather, he is asking the supreme arbiter to look at the trajectory of his heart, to see the genuine devotion that anchors his secret deeds, and to recognize that the accusations hurled against him by his enemies are entirely fabricated. Illusion. He understands that earthly judges can be swayed by eloquent arguments, bribed by silver, or intimidated by the threat of violence. In the courts of men, a clever liar can often twist the truth and escape the consequences of his actions, leaving the innocent to suffer the penalty of false accusations. But the righteous God is a master of the internal universe. He is the one who intimately probes the deepest corridors of the human mind and heart. The Creator bypasses the external performance, peeling back the layers of religious pretense and social reputation to examine the raw, unfiltered motives that drive human behavior. He reads the unspoken thoughts and weighs the silent intentions of the spirit with a precision that leaves no room for error. For the Shepherd King, this divine omniscience is not a source of terror but an endless wellspring of comfort. He welcomes the penetrating gaze of the Almighty, knowing that the divine scrutiny will ultimately validate the upright and expose the treacherous masquerade of his pursuers. He finds profound solace in the truth that his invisible devotion is entirely visible to the one who matters most. With his heart completely laid bare before the throne, the king issues a passionate plea for the restoration of peace across the fractured landscape of his nation. O Most High, bring to an end the violence of the wicked, he prays, and make the righteous secure. He mourns the innocent blood that has soaked the soil of his homeland, grieving the destruction caused by men whose hearts are pregnant with malice. He looks at the societal devastation wrought by arrogant leaders who use their power to crush the helpless rather than protect them. He asks the sovereign to completely dismantle the structures of cruelty that have oppressed the vulnerable for far too long. He longs for a restored reality where the upright can walk freely without the constant fear of the hunter, where communities can flourish under the benevolent canopy of divine justice, and where the song of the oppressor is replaced by the joyful shouts of the redeemed. As he concludes his vision of the heavenly courtroom, a profound sense of security wraps around his weary frame. He looks down at his empty hands, realizing he needs no physical shield of hammered bronze or stretched leather. My shield is God Most High, he proclaims into the stillness of the cavern, who saves the upright in heart. He recognizes that the Creator is a righteous judge, a deity who displays his righteous indignation every single day against those who persistently refuse to abandon their destructive paths. The Lord is not a passive observer of human suffering. He is an active defender of the weak, preparing his instruments of justice for the precise moment of intervention. The vision of the gathering nations begins to fade, returning the king to the physical reality of his desert refuge. But the atmosphere inside the cave has been permanently altered. The oppressive weight of anxiety has been lifted, replaced by a deep, enduring peace. He knows that his case has been heard, his integrity has been validated, and his ultimate deliverance is absolutely guaranteed. He lies down upon the rocky floor, wrapping his rough cloak around his shoulders. The enemies may still prowl in the darkness outside, but their threats are completely meaningless now. The verdict of the cosmos has already been spoken, and the Shepherd King rests securely in the unshakable justice of his Lord. The deep, velvet dark of the Judean night begins to break as a faint, pale line of silver stretches across the eastern horizon. Inside the quiet chamber of the cavern, the Shepherd King remains awake, his spirit completely attuned to the unseen movements of divine governance. He has watched from his rocky post as his enemies spent the dark hours plotting his destruction, gathering their weapons and refining their strategies. But as he looks out into the dim twilight, a profound spiritual understanding washes over his soul. He sees past the immediate danger of their spears and bows, beholding the immutable moral laws that the Creator has woven into the very fabric of human existence. If a man does not relent, the Creator will sharpen his glittering sword. The king meditates on the absolute certainty of divine retribution for those who persistently refuse to alter their destructive paths. He understands that the patience of the Almighty is not a sign of weakness or apathy, but a period of mercy designed to allow the wayward to repent. However, if the warning signs are ignored, and the heart remains hardened in malice, the machinery of cosmic justice begins to move with unstoppable force. The sovereign bends and strings his great bow, preparing his deadly instruments of execution. His flaming arrows are already fixed upon the coordinates of rebellion, ready to be released at the exact moment necessary to restore ultimate equity to the earth. The warrior king observes the psychological and spiritual progression of a mind consumed by malice, using the vivid imagery of a natural process to describe the birth of ruin. He notes that the worker of iniquity becomes pregnant with evil, nurturing dark designs in the secret chambers of his thoughts. Day after day, this hidden corruption grows, fueled by arrogance and a complete disregard for the laws of heaven. Yet when the time comes for this labor of malice to be brought into the open, the result is completely different from what the schemer anticipated. The deceptive mind ultimately gives birth to nothing but complete disillusionment and self-destruction. The grand empire of influence they sought to build turns to ash in their hands, leaving them empty and exposed. The king watches as this principle manifests in the physical strategies of his pursuers. He describes the actions of the predator with striking accuracy, noting that the wicked man builds his life around the art of the trap. Whoever digs a deep hole, scooping out the earth with tireless labor, believes he is constructing the perfect instrument to destroy an innocent victim. He conceals the mouth of the pit with branches and loose soil, waiting in the shadows with a cruel smile, confident that the righteous will stumble into the darkness. But the laws of the universe cannot be manipulated by human cleverness. The spiritual architecture of sowing and reaping ensures that the architect of ruin falls headlong into the very pit he dug for another. The trouble they cause recoils directly upon them. The king declares his voice, carrying the calm weight of a prophet. Their violence comes down hard upon their own crowns, completely missing the target they intended to demolish. This is the ultimate irony of wickedness. It serves as its own executioner. The very traps designed to ensnare the feet of the humble become the chains that bind the hands of the tyrant. The slanderous words launched to destroy an innocent reputation loop back through the corridors of time to dismantle the honor of the liar. The innocent wanderer walks safely past the hazard, completely unaware of the danger, until he looks back to see his pursuers trapped by the mechanics of their own malice. This realization triggers a profound shift in the emotional landscape of the cavern. The lingering shadows of grief and anxiety are permanently banished by a glorious sunburst of genuine gratitude. The king stands to his feet, no longer feeling the constriction of the stone walls or the weight of his physical isolation. I will give thanks to the Lord because of his righteousness, he proclaims into the crisp morning air, letting the melody echo down through the winding ravines. I will sing the praises of the name of the Lord Most High. He recognizes that his survival is not a matter of luck or superior military tactics, but the natural outcome of a life aligned with the unswerving equity of the Creator. He prepares to step out of the cave to face the challenges of the new day, his heart entirely anchored in the triumph of divine law. The surrounding armies may still carry their finely forged shields and boast of their numbers, but to the eyes of the Shepherd King, they are already defeated by their own choices. He walks forward with the steady posture of a man who knows that righteousness is the strongest fortress in existence. The light of the dawn illuminates his face, casting a brilliant glow upon the path ahead as he moves out of the shadows and into the fulfillment of a promise that no human hand can ever destroy. Join the community of faith. This incredible journey through the Psalms is just beginning, and we want you to be a part of every single chapter. If your heart was strengthened by the truth of how the enemy's traps backfire, please take a factor to work moment to engage with the video right now. Smash that thumbs up button to help spread this message of hope and divine justice to thousands of other believers around the world who are fighting their own battles in the wilderness. Click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single episode of this 30-part transformation. Walking through the scriptures together keeps our spirits anchored. We want to hear your voice. In what ways have you seen a situation in your own life completely turn around where a trap meant for your harm actually recoiled and turned into a blessing? Share your personal testimonies, thoughts, or prayer requests in the comments section below so we can uplift and encourage one another as a global community. The cool morning breeze sweeps through the jagged canyons of Judea, clearing away the lingering mists of dawn and carrying with it a profound shift in the celestial melody. Inside the limestone refuge, the atmosphere of intense defensive warfare begins to dissolve into a completely different spiritual experience. The Shepherd King is no longer focusing on the dust of the battlefield or the closing traps of his pursuers. A wave of divine inspiration washes over his soul, lifting his thoughts out of the rugged wilderness and transporting his mind into the grand, resplendent courts of an eternal kingdom. The heavy weight of his current isolation is entirely replaced by a spectacular vision of royal majesty and divine favor. My heart is stirred by a noble theme as I recite my verses for the King. He speaks these words with a sudden, passionate urgency, feeling his inner being overflow with a creative force that demands expression. He describes the sensation with striking imagery, declaring that his tongue has become the pen of a skillful writer, moving with effortless precision to record a grand tapestry of celestial truth. This is not a song born of human flattery or political convenience. It is a prophetic anthem whispered directly into his spirit by the breath of the Almighty. He is being permitted to look past the temporal failures of earthly monarchs to behold the ultimate realization of leadership, a true sovereign anointed by the hand of the Creator to rule with absolute grace and unswerving integrity. The poet king begins to describe the physical and spiritual appearance of this magnificent ruler, his language saturated with deep admiration. "You are the most excellent of men," he proclaims into the crisp morning air, his voice echoing down through the winding ravines. "Your lips have been anointed with pure grace, since God has blessed you forever." He sees a monarch whose authority is not derived from intimidation or raw military dominance, but from an intrinsic beauty of character that commands immediate voluntary allegiance. The words that fall from the lips of this king are filled with life, healing the broken, establishing truth, and scattering the clouds of deception that have plagued the human race for generations. This vision of the ideal ruler provides a stark healing contrast to the corruption the Shepherd King has witnessed in his own lifetime. He has seen firsthand how earthly power can warp the human mind, turning chosen leaders into paranoid tyrants who use their position to crush the innocent and hunt the loyal. He has felt the bitter sting of serving a broken system where jealousy overrides justice and empty flattery is valued over genuine integrity. But the ruler in his vision stands entirely free from these earthly stains. This king is the perfect embodiment of divine law, a sovereign whose heart is completely aligned with the purposes of heaven, and whose throne is securely anchored in the bedrock of righteousness. The character of this majestic king is fundamentally defined by his relationship with moral truth. "You love righteousness and hate wickedness," the poet declares, highlighting the foundational pillar of the royal administration. This is not a passive preference, but an active, unyielding dedication to absolute equity, because this monarch has fiercely defended the cause of the vulnerable and rejected the corrupt paths of the treacherous. The divine sovereign has elevated him far above his companions. The Creator has personally poured out the oil of joy upon his head, anointing his life with a deep, permanent gladness that outshines the temporary pleasures of worldly empires. The king meditates on the cosmic implications of this royal anointing, recognizing that this vision stretches far beyond his own immediate lifespan. He is being allowed to glimpse the eternal lineage of promise, a kingdom that will outlast the rise and fall of nations and stand unshakable when the mountains themselves crumble into the sea. The reality of his current suffering in the desert cave begins to feel incredibly small when measured against the vast unfolding canvas of divine history. He realizes that his present trials are not a sign of abandonment, but the exact forge being used to shape his own character, so that he can one day reflect the image of this perfect king. He stands to his feet, fully embracing the creative fire that has transformed his stone prison into a royal scriptorium. He no longer feels like a hunted fugitive, counting his final days in the dust. He is a prophet of the Most High, a master scribe recording the blueprints of an eternal kingdom for generations yet unborn. The melody of his new song fills the dark corners of the cavern, banishing the last remaining whispers of doubt and securing his mind in absolute tranquility. He knows that the true king is on his way, that justice will inevitably prevail, and that his own life is completely safe within the grand design of the sovereign architect. The morning sun has climbed into its full brilliance, burning away the last violet shadows from the jagged valleys of Judea and bathing the wilderness in a glorious golden light. Inside the limestone cave, the transformation of the Shepherd King is complete. The atmosphere of a damp, claustrophobic hiding place has entirely dissolved, replaced by the spiritual splendor of a royal throne room. The Prophet King stands near the mouth of the cavern, his eyes reflecting the brilliant landscape outside, but his inward gaze is locked onto a much grander scene. The creative fire of the Holy Spirit continues to flow through his being, prompting his tongue to move with the elegance of a master scribe as he continues his spectacular anthem for the eternal King. "Gird your sword on your side, you mighty one. Clothe yourself with splendor and majesty." He speaks these words with a resonant authority that seems to shake the very dust from the cave walls. He addresses the ultimate warrior king, calling upon him to array himself in the full panoply of celestial warfare. This is not a description of an earthly tyrant arming himself for a campaign of conquest and subjugation. The weapons of this monarch are forged in the fires of eternal justice, and his armor is the very light of the divine presence itself. He is urged to strap his glittering sword upon his thigh, to step into his magnificent chariot, and to prepare his heart to ride forth across the geography of the earth to establish the order of heaven. The poet king marks the exact principles that serve as the engines of this royal advance. In your majesty, ride forth victoriously in the cause of truth, humility, and justice. This is a profound, striking paradox that completely upends the world's understanding of power. Earthly empires ride forth in the cause of arrogance, exploitation, and deception. They build their thrones on the backs of the crushed and secure their borders through the spread of fear. But this king moves forward to defend the fragile pillars of reality. He rides to validate absolute truth in a world saturated with lies, to elevate the beauty of humility above the pride of tyrants, and to execute perfect justice for those who have been stripped of their dignity. The king visualizes the unstoppable momentum of this divine campaign, describing the movements of the royal hand with deep awe. "Let your right hand achieve awesome deeds," he proclaims into the vast desert air. He sees a monarch whose actions are perfectly synchronized with the moral laws of the cosmos. The advance of this king is not a chaotic burst of destruction, but a precise surgical intervention designed to dismantle the structures of wickedness. The arrows of his courtroom are incredibly sharp, penetrating the inner core of the king's enemies and causing whole populations of rebels to fall submissive beneath his feet. The resistance of the proud crumbles into dust before the sheer majesty of his arrival. This vision provides an immediate healing balm for the shepherd king as he reflects on his own current circumstances. He looks down at his simple sandals and his worn tunic, remembering that just hours ago he felt like a helpless victim running from the malicious traps of an earthly army. He realized that the rulers of this present age, with all their chariots, their thousands of soldiers, and their sophisticated political networks, are nothing more than a passing shadow. Their power is a brief illusion that will vanish the moment the true sovereign arises to claim his inheritance. The knowledge that he is aligned with this eternal king fills his soul with an unshakable, permanent fortitude. He addresses the permanence of this divine government, lifting his language to a level of cosmic absolute. "Your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom." He recognizes that every earthly dynasty carries the seeds of its own decay. Kings die, empires fracture, and human laws are corrupted by the passage of time. But the throne of the ultimate ruler is anchored in the unchangeable nature of the Creator. His administration is defined by a straight scepter, an emblem of rule that never bends to favor the rich, never warps to oppress the poor, and never deviates from the straight line of absolute equity. You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore, God has set you above your companions. The poet king highlights the ethical core that triggers the supreme anointing of the monarch. This king does not merely execute laws out of a sense of detached duty. He possesses a passionate internal alignment with the good and a fierce, unyielding hatred for the treacherous. Because his character is completely pure, the divine sovereign has set him apart, pouring out the oil of joy upon his head in an abundance that outshines every other ruler in history. This gladness is the natural fruit of a life lived in perfect harmony with the purposes of heaven, a deep, unshakable joy that permeates the entire royal house. The king stands fully exposed to the brilliant morning light at the cave's entrance, his heart overflowing with the majestic theme of his song. He understands that his own season of suffering in the wilderness is a necessary preparation, a crucible designed to shape his character into the likeness of this righteous ruler. He is learning to love righteousness and hate wickedness in the secret places of adversity, so that he can one day reflect that same divine equity when he is elevated to the throne. The fears of the cave are completely gone, replaced by a permanent anthem of praise that secures his mind in perfect tranquility as he prepares to walk forward into the destiny prepared for him. The golden brilliance of the Judean morning fills the wide expanse of the valley, casting its radiant light into the furthest recesses of the limestone cave. Inside this sacred space, the shepherd king remains elevated in a state of sublime prophetic ecstasy. The local dangers of his current crisis have faded into utter insignificance. His spirit is completely immersed in the sights, sounds, and fragrances of a royal palace that transcends the limits of time and space. He has seen the true king ride forth victoriously in the cause of truth, humility, and justice. Now his internal vision expands to behold the majestic celebration, the royal court, and the eternal lineage that will flow from this divine coronation. All your robes are fragrant with myrrh and aloes, and cassia from palaces adorned with ivory. The music of strings makes you glad. He whispers these words as if he can actually inhale the exotic perfumes of the heavenly sanctuary. He visualizes the majestic monarch stepping into the grand reception halls, surrounded by an atmosphere of celebration. The royal garments are saturated with precious spices brought from distant mysterious lands, carrying a fragrance that speaks of purity, consecration, and costly sacrifice. The architecture surrounding the ruler is of unparalleled beauty, featuring magnificent chambers intricately adorned with pure ivory that gleam under the celestial light. Through these vast resonant halls, the delicate melodies of stringed instruments drift like a gentle breeze, filling the heart of the king with a deep, permanent gladness that banishes every memory of conflict. The poet king looks upon the assembly of the royal court, marveling at the dignity and honor that characterizes every individual in the presence of the sovereign. He notes that daughters of ancient kings are numbered among his honored women, representing the nations of the earth that have surrendered their sovereignty to align with his righteous rule. At the right hand of the monarch stands the royal bride herself, a figure of radiant elegance, adorned in the finest, purest gold of Ophir. This bride is the crown jewel of the kingdom, reflecting the splendor of her master and standing as a living symbol of a permanent covenant that can never be broken by the passage of time. The prophetic voice shifts its focus, turning to address the royal bride directly with words of gentle, urgent counsel. "Listen, daughter, and pay careful attention," the writer implores, his voice echoing off the smooth stone walls of the cavern. "Forget your past people and your father's house. Let the king be completely enthralled by your beauty. Honor him, for he is your sovereign lord." This is a profound call to absolute devotion, an invitation to leave behind the old identities, the cultural idols, and the safe dependencies of the past, to fully embrace a glorious destiny within the royal household. The bride is encouraged to find her complete security in the love of the monarch, knowing that her value is fully validated in his sight. The king watches as the surrounding empires begin to react to the establishment of this eternal administration. He sees the wealthy residents of ancient Tyre arriving at the palace gates, carrying lavish gifts and seeking the favor of the royal house with submissive posture. The most affluent citizens of the world realize that their material riches are meaningless unless they are brought into alignment with the kingdom of justice. Inside her private chambers, the princess shines with unparalleled glory, her magnificent gown skillfully interwoven with threads of pure, shimmering gold. She is led to the king in embroidered garments of intricate design, a grand procession of beauty and celebration that moves with steady grace. Led with joy and gladness, they enter the palace of the king. "Your sons will take the place of your fathers." The poet king describes the exuberant momentum of the royal wedding, watching as the virgin companions of the bride follow her into the grand sanctuary with shouting and praise. This is not a brief celebration destined to fade when the night ends. It is the dawning of a permanent era of prosperity and peace. The focus of the prophecy shifts toward the future, addressing the generational legacy of the royal line. The king is assured that his descendants will take the place of his ancestors, breaking the cycle of past failures and rising up to become wise, righteous princes established throughout the vast geography of the earth. The shepherd king stands fully exposed to the brilliant morning sun at the entrance of his cave, his heart completely anchored in the reality of this eternal lineage. He looks back upon his own heritage, remembering the simple fields of Bethlehem and the humble life of a shepherd boy. He realizes that the trials he is currently enduring in the wilderness are not an interruption to his destiny, but the exact mechanism the Creator is using to prepare him to step into this royal narrative. He is being forged in the dark places so that he can one day govern with the same grace, righteousness, and permanent integrity that he has witnessed in his vision. He concludes his magnificent anthem with a declaration of unyielding commitment to the memory of his sovereign. "I will perpetuate your memory through all generations," he proclaims into the vast desert air, letting the melody resonate down through the winding canyons. "Therefore, the nations will praise you forever and ever." He knows that his words are not destined to be buried in the dust of the cave. They will be preserved across the centuries, serving as a beacon of hope for countless believers who will navigate their own wilderness seasons. The fears of the hunt are completely gone, replaced by a deep, enduring peace that secures his mind in perfect tranquility as he prepares to walk forward into the brilliant future prepared by his Lord. The blinding heat of the Judean sun has reached its zenith, striking the desolate white cliffs outside the cavern entrance and sending a shimmering haze across the canyon floor. Inside the deep limestone refuge, the prophetic music shifts, once again, returning from the fragrant ivory halls of the royal palace to the immediate high-stakes spiritual battlefield of the desert. The shepherd king sits upon the dusty stone floor, his fingers tracing the smooth edge of his unstrung bow. The physical reality of his situation is undeniable. Trackers are still scouring the ravines, and false witnesses are actively dismantling his honor in the towns below. Yet the fear that once threatened to choke his breath has been permanently replaced by a fierce, holy determination. "Contend, Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me." He speaks this plea into the quiet gloom, using the precise language of a legal advocate who is also a commander-in-chief. He is no longer attempting to defend himself through human cleverness or physical strength. He officially transfers the responsibility of his preservation into the hands of the ultimate warrior of the cosmos. He petitions the Almighty to actively don the physical armor of cosmic warfare, calling upon him to take up the massive shield and buckler, to stand as an immovable barrier between his fragile life and the rushing tide of human malice. The king envisions the Lord rising to his feet in the heavenly sanctuary, his form arrayed in dazzling light as he prepares to come to the aid of his servant. He begs the Creator to brandish the celestial spear and javelin, locking eyes with the fierce trackers who hunt the innocent through the desert mazes. In the quiet depths of his soul, the king listens intently, longing for that one critical assurance that outweighs the threats of 1,000 armies. He prays to hear the divine voice whisper directly into his spirit saying, "I am your salvation." This single declaration is enough to anchor his mind in absolute stability, rendering the strategies of his pursuers completely meaningless. The warrior contemplates the ultimate destiny of those who have launched an unprovoked war against his life and reputation. He does not request their physical torture, but rather their complete spiritual and social undoing. "May those who seek my life be thoroughly disgraced and put to open shame," he prays, his voice carrying the steady gravity of a judicial sentence. "May those who plot my utter ruin be turned back in absolute dismay, their complex military plans dissolving into total confusion." He sees his enemies becoming as helpless as dry chaff before a furious desert gale, with the angel of the covenant personally driving them away into the outer darkness. The king visualizes the treacherous path that awaits the deceitful mapping out a spiritual landscape of retribution. "May their path become dark and slippery," he declares, with the angel of the law pursuing them relentlessly through the shadows. This is the exact pattern of divine equity. Those who have forced an innocent man to walk through a terrifying wilderness will find themselves walking a dark, unstable road where their footing will completely fail. Because they hid their predatory nets for him without any just cause, and dug a deep pit of ruin without any justification, the king knows that surprise destruction will inevitably overtake them before they can realize their danger. The very net they hid will entangle their own ankles. They will fall headlong into the pit, to their own ruin. He watches the conceptual collapse of the enemy's network, seeing the precise mechanism of their malice loop back through time to become their own executioner. The complex traps designed to destroy the Shepherd King will close tightly upon the feet of the tyrants, leaving the humble untouched and the righteous secure. This certainty causes a profound transformative joy to erupt from the deepest chambers of his chest. He stands up within the narrow cave, his posture completely relaxed, his face illuminated by a sudden ray of sunlight piercing the stone ceiling. "Then my soul will rejoice in the Lord and delight in his salvation," he exclaims, his heart overflowing with a magnificent song of deliverance. "My whole being, every bone and fiber of my frame will cry out, 'Who is like you, Lord?'" He praises the unique, unparalleled character of the Creator, who specializes in rescuing the helpless from the iron grip of those who are far too strong for. And them he honors the protector of the poor and the needy, the one who stands as an iron wall against the thieves who attempt to rob the vulnerable of their life, their destiny, and their dignity. He knows that his current state of poverty in the cave is not a permanent condition, but a temporary stage before a glorious public vindication. He steps closer to the mouth of the cave, looking out over the expansive sun-bleached desert with a spirit that is completely detached from panic. He understands that the invisible shield of heaven is already deployed around his life, rendering the spears of his pursuers completely obsolete. He is no longer a victim hiding in a hole. He is a cleared man standing in the victory of a celestial verdict. The memories of his past achievements and the certainty of his future inheritance merge into a single anthem of praise that fills the cavern, securing his mind in perfect permanent tranquility as he prepares to walk out into the bright destiny prepared for him by his king. Join the community of faith. The powerful protective promises of the Psalms are designed to give us an unshakable confidence when we feel outnumbered or trapped in our own difficult wilderness. We want you to be an active part of our global community as we journey through this 30-part spiritual transformation. Please take a moment to engage with our channel right now. Smash that thumbs up button to help the YouTube algorithm share this emotionally rich, transformative Bible story with thousands of other believers who need to be reminded that God fights for the innocent. Click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single part of this journey through the cave. Let's keep our hearts anchored in the power of the Word together. We want to hear your voice. When you feel completely overwhelmed by circumstances or people that seem far too strong for you to handle alone, how does the image of the Lord brandishing a shield and spear on your behalf give you the courage to stand firm? Share your testimonies, reflections, or personal prayer requests below so we can uplift and encourage one another. The blistering heat of the day begins to fracture into the long golden shadows of the late afternoon. Outside the limestone sanctuary, the rugged wilderness of Judea seems to warp under the weight of an oppressive silence. Inside the cavern, the Shepherd King kneels in the dust, his head bowed heavily against his chest. The majestic visions of celestial thrones, ivory palaces, and warring angels have faded, leaving him face to face with the painful, raw reality of human betrayal. The spiritual high ground he occupied moments ago is suddenly flooded by a wave of deep emotional sorrow. He feels the sharp sting of isolation, not because he is physically alone in the desert, but because his mind is wandering through the memories of those who once shared his bread, but now hunt his life. Ruthless witnesses come forward. They question me on things I know nothing about. He speaks this heavy lament into the cold stone of the cave, his voice trembling with the agony of a fractured heart. He describes the malicious tactics of his adversaries, who have constructed a massive web of slander to destroy his reputation before the nation. They have brought forward corrupt accusers who confront him with fabricated crimes, demanding answers for conspiracies he never devised and actions he never committed. The king watches his life's work dismantled by the stroke of a deceptive tongue. They repay me bitter evil for the genuine good I performed, he groans, leaving my soul completely stripped, like a parent bereaved of their only child. The depth of his grief is rooted in the history of his relationships with his current persecutors. The king remembers a time when these very men were his close companions, his brothers in arms, and the recipients of his deepest empathy. He recalls the days when those individuals fell desperately ill, stricken with disease, or facing their own seasons of vulnerability. In those moments, he did not turn away with a cold, indifferent heart. He chose to enter into their suffering, clothing his own royal frame in coarse sackcloth and humbling his soul with rigorous fasting. He spent his nights pacing the floors of his chambers, pouring out his heart in agonizing prayer for their restoration. Even when his prayers seemed to return to his own chest unanswered, the shepherd king did not cease his intercession. He went about mourning through the streets, as though he were grieving for a beloved friend or his own brother. He bowed his head down in heavy sorrow, weeping with the profound, uncontained grief of a son who has just buried his own mother. He had invested his emotional life into their well-being, anchoring his loyalty in a genuine, unselfish love. He assumed that the bonds forged in the fires of mutual adversity would endure any political storm, creating a permanent sanctuary of trust between their houses. Yet the moment his own footing became unstable, the illusion of their loyalty completely vanished. When I stumbled, he recalls his eyes filling with fresh tears of disillusionment. They gathered together in malicious glee. The very people he had wept for assembled themselves in mocking crowds to celebrate his sudden downfall. Assailants gathered against his reputation and his life without his knowledge, striking him from the shadows when he was least prepared to defend himself. They slandered his character without a moment of ceasing, using their words to rip his honor into ribbons. Like ungodly, profane mockers at a distorted feast, they maliciously ground their teeth at him in public displays of unbridled hatred. How long, Lord, will you look on? Rescue my precious life from these lions. The king lifts his eyes toward the stone ceiling, his prayer turning into an urgent, high-stakes appeal for swift divine intervention. He asks the silent watcher of the heavens how much longer he must endure the status of a spectator to his own destruction. He begs the Almighty to step down into the arena, to deliver his fragile existence from their ravages, to preserve his unique, irreplaceable life from the jaws of these predatory beasts. He recognizes that without a supernatural rescue, the lions of treachery will completely swallow his destiny, burying his name in the dust of the wilderness. Despite the intensity of his current heartbreak, a flicker of unyielding determination begins to reignite within his spirit. He refuses to allow the bitter taste of betrayal to poison the wellspring of his faith. He makes a solemn strategic vow before the throne of heaven, looking past his current isolation to a future day of public restoration. I will give you magnificent thanks in the great assembly, he proclaims, his voice gaining strength as it echoes off the cavern walls. Among the vast, roaring throngs of the nation, I will publicly praise your name. He knows that his story will not end in the silence of this desert hole. His deliverance will become a public monument to the faithfulness of the Creator. He steps toward the front of the cave, watching the twilight paint the wilderness in deep shades of indigo and violet. The pain of the broken relationships is still present, but it no longer has the power to paralyze his will. He realizes that the ultimate validation of his life does not depend on the shifting loyalty of men, but on the unchangeable verdict of the Supreme Judge. He wraps his cloak tightly around his frame, his mind completely resting in the certainty that the truth will eventually outshine the lies of the mockers. The night may be dark, and the lions may still growl in the ravines below, but the Shepherd King is anchored in an eternal covenant that no human treachery can ever dismantle. The deep velvet dusk of the Judean wilderness thickens, drawing a veil of indigo and shadow over the jagged ridges. Inside the stone boundaries of the cavern, the Shepherd King remains locked in a battle for his mind. The echo of human cruelty still rings in his ears, a persistent distortion that seeks to break his focus. He moves closer to the entrance where the night air stirs, his heart burning with an intense, focused plea. He is no longer looking back at the broken relationships of his past. He is staring directly at the immediate pressing malice of the adversaries who hedge him in analyzing the anatomy of their psychological warfare. Do not let those gloat over me, who are my enemies without cause. He speaks this request into the vast open space of the desert, his voice steadying as he aligns his mind with the throne of equity. He petitions the sovereign judge to put an end to the triumphant arrogance of his pursuers. He prays that those who harbor a baseless, irrational hatred against his soul be stripped of their ability to maliciously wink their eyes in secret triumph. This silent, knowing gesture of the enemy is a weapon designed to broadcast total dominance, a non-verbal sneer meant to convince the observer that the victim is completely powerless and utterly discarded by both heaven and earth. The king exposes the treacherous nature of their public and private discourse, mapping out the systematic strategy they use to destabilize the nation. They do not speak peaceably. He observes his words, laying bare the hidden motives of the coup. Instead, they sit in their hidden chambers, deliberately devising false accusations against those who live quietly and innocently in the land. They target the humble, the loyal, and the undisturbed, creating networks of slander to fragment the social order. They open their mouths exceptionally wide against the king, shouting their mocking declarations into the public squares. Aha, aha. With our very own eyes, we have witnessed his absolute downfall. This public celebration of his presumed ruin is the deepest pit the enemy has dug. They attempt to manufacture a false reality, using the sheer volume of their shouting to convince the population that the Shepherd King is a finished man. But the king counters their loud delusions with a quiet, devastating truth. You have seen this, O Lord, he proclaims, looking past the horizontal plane of human noise to fix his gaze upon the omniscient watcher. Do not remain silent in the face of this absolute distortion. Do not stand far from me, my master, while the liars attempt to rewrite the history of your faithfulness. The warrior calls for a dramatic breakthrough in the celestial courtroom, demanding that the passive silence of the heavens be broken by an unmistakable manifestation of divine advocacy. Awake and rise to my defense. Contend for my cause, my God, and my Lord. He uses the language of a formal legal appeal, requesting a definitive binding verdict from the supreme arbiter of the universe. Vindicate me in your absolute righteousness, O Lord my God, and do not allow them to gloat over my physical isolation. He understands that if the enemy succeeds in this campaign of deception, the standard of truth itself will be dragged through the dust. Do not let them think in their hearts, aha, just what we wanted, or say, we have swallowed him up completely. Ah, ah, ah. He targets the internal desires of the tyrants, praying that the ultimate satisfaction of their cruelty be completely denied. He asks that a wave of total confusion and public shame overwhelm every single individual who finds delight in his personal distress. May those who exalt themselves over my brokenness be clothed in permanent disgrace and covered in dishonor, he declares, watching the conceptual reversal of his circumstances. The very garments of pride they wear so confidently today will become the heavy blankets of shame that bury their legacy tomorrow. As he speaks the downfall of the mockers, his heart pivots toward the brilliant, joyful future that awaits the family of faith. He envisions a completely different crowd gathering on the horizon. May those who delight in my vindication shout for joy and gladness, he exclaims, his spirit rising above the limitations of the stone walls. He sees his true allies, the humble and the loyal citizens who have refused to bow to the lies of the usurper, coming together to sing a new song of victory. He prays that their mouths be filled with a permanent, unchanging testimony. The Lord be highly exalted, who takes great delight in the well-being and prosperity of his servant. The shepherd king stands fully erect in the darkness of the cave, the heavy spirit of lament, completely replaced by a permanent, unshakable mantle of praise. He knows that his vindication is not a matter of human speculation, but an unchangeable decree already recorded in the high courts of heaven. My tongue will proclaim your righteousness, he vows, letting the melody fill the furthest corners of his limestone refuge. Your praises will be on my lips all day long. He lies down upon the rough earth, completely secure within the invisible wall of divine favor. The enemies may continue their shouting in the valleys below, but their voices have lost all power. The true verdict has been spoken, and the king rests in absolute peace. The deep stillness of the midnight hour wraps the Judean wilderness in a dense, impenetrable dark. Outside the narrow entrance of the stone refuge, the crisp desert wind sweeps across the lonely ridges, carrying away the dust of a long, exhausting journey. Inside the cavern, the chaotic noise of human conflict has been completely silenced. The shepherd king sits quietly on the smooth bedrock, his hands resting gently in his lap, his heart entirely detached from the panic of the world. He has navigated the valleys of betrayal and survived the loud delusions of the mockers. Now, in the solitary quiet of his sanctuary, his spirit returns to the foundational beauty of a simple, unyielding devotion. In you, Lord my God, I put my trust. I trust in you. He whispers this solemn declaration into the dark, letting the words settle around him like a protective fortress. This is not a fragile hope manufactured to soothe his anxious nerves. It is a permanent covenant alignment, a deep anchoring of his entire identity in the character of the sovereign provider. He places his life, his lineage, and his royal destiny completely into the divine keeping, making a conscious choice to look away from the physical variables of danger. Do not let me be put to shame, he petitions the throne of grace, nor let my enemies triumph over me. He knows that his preservation is directly linked to the honor of the Creator, and he rests in that unchangeable security. The king reflects on the universal laws of faith, expanding his meditation to include the wider community of believers who will one day walk through their own difficult wilderness seasons. He proclaims a glorious cosmic principle: no one who hopes in you will ever be put to shame. This is an absolute promise, a spiritual guarantee that outlasts the rise and fall of earthly empires. True permanent shame is reserved solely for those who are treacherous without cause, those who choose the path of deceit and exploit the vulnerable for personal gain. The humble wanderer who stakes his survival on the word of the Almighty will never find himself abandoned to the dust of defeat. The petitioner desires more than just physical safety from his pursuers. He longs for a deep internal transformation of his mind. Show me your ways, Lord, he prays, his voice carrying the humble posture of a true student. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and instruct me, for you are God, my Savior, and my hope is in you all day long. He realizes that the wilderness is not merely a place of testing, but a magnificent academy of the soul, where he can learn the structural blueprints of divine wisdom. He wants his steps to be perfectly synchronized with the tracks of equity, ensuring that his heart remains free from the corruption of the age. He reaches back into the deep corridors of history, appealing to the ancient fountain of mercy, that has sustained the righteous through countless generations. Remember, Lord, your great compassion and unswerving love, for they are from of old. He looks at his own life with absolute transparency, asking the sovereign to bypass the errors of his past. Do not remember the sins of my youth, he groans, or my rebellious deviations. According to your enduring love, remember me, for you, Lord, are intrinsically good. This is the ultimate ground of his confidence. He does not stand on the basis of his own flawless performance, but on the unshakable bedrock of the divine character. Good and upright is the Lord, therefore he instructs sinners in his ways. The king marvels at the beautiful humility of the Creator, who does not distance himself from the broken, but actively guides the meek in what is right, teaching them his unique way. All the pathways of the Almighty are marked by unswerving love and fidelity toward those who keep the demands of his holy covenant. For the sake of your magnificent name, Lord, he exclaims, forgive my iniquity, though it is incredibly great. He understands that true forgiveness is not a small compromise, but a powerful act of divine sovereignty that restores the broken spirit to its full standing in the heavenly court. He ponders the identity of those who choose to live in the fear of the Lord, mapping out the multi-generational blessings that await the faithful family. The Creator will personally instruct them in the precise ways they should choose, ensuring that their days are spent in genuine prosperity and that their descendants inherit the land of promise. The Lord confides deeply in those who fear him, making his secret covenant known to them in the intimate spaces of mutual trust. This high level of spiritual intimacy is the true treasure of the cave, a wealth that outshines the gold of ancient kings and completely shields the mind from the terror of human isolation. The shepherd king stands to his feet in the darkness, his eyes fixed on the distant stars gleaming through the cracks of the stone ceiling. My eyes are ever on the Lord, he vows, for only he will release my feet from the snare of the hunter. He knows that the traps are still hidden in the ravines outside, but he refuses to look down at the dirt in search of danger. He keeps his gaze pulled upward, anchored in the radiant beauty of his master. The peace of the sanctuary has completely saturated his soul, transforming his rocky prison into a house of glory where the song of the faithful never ceases. The deep midnight hours press heavily against the outer edges of the limestone fortress, casting long, eerie shadows across the cracked earth of the Judean wilderness. Inside the quiet parameters of the cavern, the profound tranquility that had anchored the shepherd king's mind is suddenly tested by a sharp wave of intense physical and emotional reality. The cold stone floor beneath him feels unyielding, a stark reminder of his current status as an exiled wanderer cut off from the comforts of his home and the fellowship of his people. The isolation of the desert begins to weigh upon his chest like a physical mass, and the spiritual warrior finds himself sliding back into the raw, unguarded territory of a deeply troubled soul. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. He whispers this raw petition into the thick gloom, his voice stripped of all royal pretense, carrying only the absolute vulnerability of a broken man. He does not hide his emotional poverty from the sight of the Almighty. He confesses the deep ache of his current state, acknowledging the bitter sting of loneliness that accompanies leadership when a kingdom fractures. The crowds that once sang his praises have vanished, replaced by the howling of the desert wind and the distant murmur of trackers who seek his absolute ruin. He feels entirely exposed, an island of grief in a vast sea of hostility, completely dependent on an immediate breakthrough of divine compassion. The king maps out the internal landscape of his suffering, describing a heart that has become too compressed by sorrow to breathe freely. Relieve the troubles of my heart, he groans, his hands pressed tightly against his chest, and free me from my agonizing anguish. He realizes that the external threat of Saul's army is only half the battle, and the far more dangerous enemy is the creeping paralysis of despair that seeks to conquer his inner sanctuary, the persistent worry for his loyal companions, the grief over his disrupted family, and the heavy uncertainty of his future have created a labyrinth of internal distress that no human logic can untangle. He opens the deepest chambers of his conscience to the scrutiny of the Supreme Judge, asking for a holistic deliverance that addresses both his external circumstances and his internal needs. Look upon my affliction and my painful distress, he prays, and take away all my sins. This is the hallmark of his spiritual maturity. Even in the middle of a high-stakes crisis, where he is the victim of unprovoked malice, he remains deeply concerned with his own moral standing before the Lord. He refuses to allow bitterness to compromise his character, knowing that the ultimate tragedy of the wilderness would not be physical death, but the loss of his purity and his connection to the Holy One. The king turns his attention back to the physical perimeter of his trial, providing a realistic assessment of the forces that have gathered to witness his destruction. See how numerous are my fierce enemies, he points out to the heavenly advocate, and see how intensely and fiercely they hate me. This is a hatred born of jealousy, an irrational rage that cannot be reasoned with or placated by diplomacy. They do not merely want to displace him from his office. They desire to completely blot out his name from the memory of the earth. The sheer volume of their numbers seems to multiply with every passing sunset, creating a wall of human hostility that closes in from every horizon. Guard my fragile life and rescue me. Do not let me be put to open shame, for I take refuge in you. He anchors his final plea in the public honor of the Creator, declaring that his survival is a test case for the reliability of the divine covenant. He refuses to look to human alliances, foreign kings, or the sharpness of his own sword for preservation. He has made the conscious strategic choice to stake his entire existence on the invisible protection of the Lord, and he trusts that this radical alignment will never result in public disgrace. He looks down at his simple gear and his worn tunic, wrapping his identity tightly in the ultimate values of the heavenly court. May integrity and uprightness protect me, he declares, because my hope, Lord, is fixed entirely in you. He looks past the narrow opening of his cavern, his perspective widening from his personal survival to the wider destiny of the community of faith. He understands that his individual trial is intrinsically linked to the larger spiritual narrative of his nation. Deliver Israel, O God, from all their numerous troubles, he concludes, his voice regaining its resonant strength as he issues a priestly benediction over the land. He prays that the peace he longs to experience in the cave will eventually cascade across the borders of his homeland, turning the wilderness of national division into a fruitful garden of unity. He rests his head back upon the smooth stone, his mind entirely quieted by the reality that the true shepherd of Israel never slumbers and never abandons his flock. Share your reflections below. The raw honesty of the Psalms reminds us that it is completely okay to tell the Creator when we feel lonely, exhausted, or overwhelmed by our current trials. We want to hear your voice as a vital part of our global family of faith. When you are caught in a season of profound loneliness or intense trial, what practical steps do you take to prevent bitterness from taking root in your heart? How have you experienced the protective power of integrity and uprightness when you were surrounded by unfair opposition or difficult circumstances? Please take a moment to share your thoughts, personal testimonies, and prayers in the comments below. Your unique insights may be the encouragement a weary soul needs to read today. If this journey through the cave is strengthening your faith, remember to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on all notifications so you don't miss the next part. The deep, heavy darkness of the desert midnight shifts into a completely different rhythm inside the stone sanctuary of the cave. The Shepherd King remains seated on the cold limestone floor, but the intense, localized grief of his personal affliction begins to lift. A profound spirit of universal wisdom descends upon his mind, expanding his perspective until the narrow boundaries of his limestone hiding place dissolve into a sweeping view of human history. He is no longer looking at his immediate pursuers through the lens of tactical survival. Instead, the Holy Spirit allows him to see the ultimate tragic end of those who build their entire existence on the fragile sand of material dominance. Hear this, all you peoples, listen, all who live in this temporary world. He speaks this grand invitation into the quiet gloom of the cavern, his voice carrying the calm, steady authority of an ancient teacher of righteousness. He addresses the entirety of the human race, calling across the frontiers of time to summon both the low and the high, the rich and the poor alike, into a shared contemplation of reality. He declares that his mouth will speak words of genuine wisdom, and the deep meditation of his heart will offer true understanding to those who are willing to listen. He is turning his own ear to a cosmic proverb, preparing his fingers to expound a heavy riddle upon the delicate strings of his silent harp. The Prophet King asks a fundamental question that challenges the core of human anxiety. Why should I fear when evil days come upon me? Why should my spirit tremble when wicked deceivers surround my path? Those who place their absolute trust in their vast wealth and boast loudly of their great fading riches. He looks past the terrifying gleam of their golden shields and the sophistication of their political networks, realizing that their apparent dominance is nothing more than a brief, passing shadow. They believe their wealth makes them invincible, but the king exposes the absolute limitation of material resources when measured against the ultimate ledger of the cosmos. He outlines a devastating truth that strips the proud of their security, laying bare the absolute equality of all men before the throne of life and death. No human being can ever redeem the life of another, he proclaims, his voice echoing off the smooth stone walls of the cave. No payment is ever enough to give to the Creator a sufficient ransom for a soul. The ransom for a single human life is far too costly. No earthly currency, no mountain of refined gold, and no vast estate of land is ever enough to buy a single moment of exemption from the grave. The rich cannot purchase an extension of their breath so that they should live on forever and escape the natural decay of the sepulchre. The king watches the inevitable leveling of human distinctions, a reality that plays out across every generation under the sun. All can see that even the wise must eventually die. The foolish and the senseless also perish in their turn, leaving their vast accumulations of wealth to complete strangers who did nothing to earn it. The proud magnates spend their brief years under the sun attempting to manufacture a false immortality, naming extensive territories after themselves and constructing monuments to preserve their honor. Yet despite their massive fortunes and their transient prestige, human beings do not endure. They are intrinsically like the beasts that perish, leaving nothing behind but dust. This is the ultimate tragic fate of those who trust completely in themselves. He maps out the spiritual anatomy of human pride, observing the generational cycle of deception that traps the followers of the arrogant. They are destined to die, he declares, their forms herded like helpless sheep into the silent realm of the underworld, with death serving as their final shepherd. The morning of divine justice will inevitably dawn, and the upright will prevail over them completely, while the physical forms of the proud decay in the dampness of the grave, far away from the ivory walls of their princely mansions. The material abundance they use to insulate themselves from vulnerability becomes a useless memory in the halls of the dead. This realization brings a profound, transformative liberation to the Shepherd King as he sits in his state of apparent poverty within the cave. He looks down at his simple dust-stained tunic and his empty hands, realizing that his current lack of material security is actually a position of supreme spiritual advantage. "But God will redeem my soul from the power of the grave," he exclaims, his heart overflowing with a magnificent anthem of absolute assurance. "He will surely take me to himself." This is the true wealth of the believer, a permanent asset that cannot be plundered by thieves, corrupted by time, or canceled by the decrees of a paranoid monarch. He issues a comforting directive to his own soul, and to all who will navigate their own seasons of deprivation. Do not be overawed or intimidated when others grow exceptionally rich, or when the external splendor of their houses increases beyond measure. For when they die, they will take absolutely nothing with them down into the dust. Their material glory will not descend with them into the dark silence of the tomb. Though, while they live, they count themselves blessed, and people praise them because they prosper, they must eventually join the generations of their ancestors who will never again see the light of life. Human beings who possess wealth but lack true understanding are exactly like the beasts that perish, vanishing into the silence of an ignored history. The deep midnight atmosphere within the cavern completely fractures, making way for a vision of raw, cataclysmic power that shakes the shepherd king to the very core of his being. He is no longer a silent watcher, measuring the passing hours in the dust of Judea. His spirit is pulled directly into a memory and a realization of the ultimate deliverance that awaits the faithful when human options are completely exhausted. He places his fingers against the rugged stone wall, feeling a supernatural tremor ripple through the mountain as his voice leaves the realm of quiet lamentation and steps into a magnificent declaration of divine intervention. "I love you, Lord, my unyielding strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer." He projects these titles into the dark, each name serving as an immovable pillar of his security. He recognizes that his God is a majestic stronghold in whom he can safely take refuge, a shield of defense, the horn of his ultimate salvation, and his high tower of protection. He recalls the sheer terror of the crisis that drove him into the wilderness, remembering how the cords of premature death had completely entangled his feet and the torrents of absolute destruction overwhelmed his mind. The snares of the grave had confronted him at every turn, leaving him cornered by a relentless predatory host that sought to swallow his destiny before it could ever take root. In his extreme distress, when his breath was compressed by the closing walls of adversity, he did not look to human diplomacy or the strength of his own arm. He called out directly to the sovereign of the cosmos, letting his desperate cry pierce the night to enter the ears of his God. From his majestic heavenly temple, the Creator heard the voice of his servant. The response of the Almighty was not a detached decree spoken from a distance, but a cataclysmic alignment of all creation to rescue a single suffering soul. The earth trembled and quaked to its foundations, and the roots of the ancient mountains shook with immense force, because the Maker of the world was filled with holy anger against the perpetrators of injustice. The king visualizes the descent of the divine warrior with vivid cinematic clarity. Smoke rose from his nostrils, and a consuming fire blazed from his mouth, scattering burning coals across the expanse of the firmament. He parted the vast curtains of the heavens and came down into the material world with thick, dark rain clouds serving as a pathway beneath his majestic feet. He mounted the glorious cherubim and flew across the sky, soaring swiftly upon the wings of a mighty tempest. He made deep darkness, his canopy enveloping his presence in the dark rain clouds of the sky, until the brightness of his immediate appearance advanced with crushing force, releasing immense hailstones and bolts of jagged lightning. The voice of the Most High resounded from the heavens like a massive peal of thunder, shattering the confidence of the proud. He shot his glittering arrows and completely scattered the enemy, routing the pursuing hosts with spectacular bolts of lightning that illuminated the entire wilderness. The hidden valleys of the sea were completely exposed, and the internal foundations of the earth were laid bare at the rebuke of the Lord, at the blast of the hot breath from his nostrils. It was an absolute demonstration of cosmic sovereignty, a reality before which the weapons of kings and the conspiracies of empires dissolve into utter nothingness. He reached down from on high and took hold of me. He drew me out of deep, overwhelming waters. The king watches the climax of the rescue, feeling the intense personal care that guides this massive display of universal power. The Creator did not allow his servant to be swept away by the raging flood of human malice. He reached deep into the mire, took a firm hold of his fragile frame, and drew him out of the suffocating currents. He rescued him from his powerful enemy, from trackers who were far too strong for his human strength to oppose. They had confronted him in the dark day of his disaster, mocking his vulnerability and celebrating his apparent isolation. But the Lord stood as an unyielding support beneath his faltering steps. He brought me out into a spacious place, the king proclaims, his voice filling every corner of the limestone cavern. He rescued me because he delighted in me. This is the profound truth that heals the wounds of betrayal. The king realizes that his worth is not determined by the opinions of the crowds or the decrees of a corrupt court. His value is fully established in the sight of the one who weighs the stars. The Lord dealt with him according to the integrity of his heart, rewarding the cleanness of his hands by turning his midnight darkness into an unquenchable light that no human strategy can ever extinguish. He stands near the entrance of the cave, his posture completely transformed by the weight of the vision. He understands that the invisible armies of heaven are already deployed around his life, rendering the spears of Saul's trackers entirely obsolete. He is no longer a fugitive hiding in a hole. He is a king in training, a preserved soul, standing in the victory of a celestial verdict. He draws a deep, clean breath of the night air, his mind completely resting in the perfection of the divine path. The night may still hold its dangers, but the Shepherd King is anchored in an eternal fortress that no human treachery can ever dismantle. The deep midnight sky begins to yield its heavy darkness to the subtle, cool currents of the pre-dawn air. Inside the limestone sanctuary, the Shepherd King remains seated upon the smooth bedrock, completely detached from the physical limitations of his hiding place. His mind has traveled through the valleys of raw grief, experienced the cataclysmic thunder of divine rescue, and witnessed the absolute futility of material pride. Now, in the quiet interval before the arrival of the morning light, his spirit is illuminated by a brilliant internal vision of the moral architecture that governs the entire creation. He looks upon the cosmic order, realizing that the same hand that guides the stars has provided an unyielding, perfect law to anchor the human soul during times of absolute chaos. The heavens declare the spectacular glory of God. The skies proclaim the intricate work of his hands. He speaks these words with a tone of quiet reverence that fills the stone chamber with a profound sense of peace. He observes that day after day the created order pours forth continuous speech, and night after night the celestial canvas reveals deep knowledge to those who possess the understanding to see. This universal testimony does not rely on human speech, nor does it use articulate words. No audible sound is ever heard from the movements of the planets or the shifting of the constellations. Yet their silent voice goes out into all the corners of the earth, and their powerful words reach the very frontiers of the inhabited world, establishing an undeniable monument to the faithfulness of the architect. The king muses on the majestic path of the sun, comparing it to a joyful bridegroom coming out of his wedding chamber, or a champion rejoicing to run his ordained course across the sky. It rises at one extreme end of the heavens and makes its perfect circuit to the other, ensuring that nothing in all creation is ever deprived of its life-giving warmth. This physical consistency becomes a magnificent metaphor for the spiritual laws of the kingdom. The king realizes that just as the sun illuminates the material world without failure, the instructions of the Creator are designed to flood the internal universe with absolute clarity, sweeping away the shadows of confusion and doubt. He begins to recite the structural attributes of this divine blueprint, his language gaining a rhythmic, unshakable strength. The law of the Lord is absolutely perfect, he proclaims, refreshing and restoring the broken soul to its original design. The statutes of the Almighty are completely trustworthy, offering a profound practical wisdom to the simple who are willing to align their steps with truth. The precepts of the Protector are fundamentally right, injecting a deep, permanent joy into the heavy heart, while the commands of the Lord are completely radiant, giving a clear spiritual light to eyes that have been dimmed by the weeping of adversity. The king contemplates the enduring purity of this spiritual heritage, contrasting it with the temporary corrupted laws of human tyrants. The fear of the Lord is entirely pure, he declares, enduring forever, without any decay or compromise. The decrees of the sovereign judge are completely firm, and all of them are intrinsically righteous in their execution. They are far more precious than mountains of refined gold, sweeter than the finest honey dripping fresh from the comb. By these flawless standards, the servant of the Almighty is thoroughly warned against the traps of the age, and in the careful keeping of them, there is a massive eternal reward that no earthly monarch can ever plunder or diminish. But who can discern their own hidden errors? Forgive my secret faults, O my master. The realization of the perfect law forces the warrior into a moment of deep, transparent self-reflection. He understands that the ultimate goal of the spiritual path is not merely survival in the wilderness, but an absolute alignment of his inner character with the holiness of heaven. He begs the searcher of hearts to cleanse his spirit from the subtle, unexamined faults that dwell within his subconscious mind. Keep your servant also from willful, arrogant sins, he petitions, praying that the corruption of pride and vengeance may never secure a ruling dominance over his thoughts. Then and only then will he be truly blameless, completely innocent of the great transgressions that destroy the soul. He stands at the boundary where the dark interior of the cave meets the first pale light of the morning dawn. He places his hands over his chest, offering the entirety of his internal world as a morning sacrifice before the throne of grace. May these words of my mouth and this silent meditation of my heart find perfect acceptance in your sight, O Lord, my unyielding rock and my ultimate redeemer. He realizes that his true sanctuary is not this limestone cave, but the unchangeable character of his protector. The external hunt may continue through the ravines below, but his mind is anchored in a permanent peace that no human treachery can ever dismantle. The first thin silver slivers of dawn begin to filter through the narrow, craggy fissures of the limestone cavern, gradually dissolving the thick, velvety darkness that had cloaked the shepherd king through the long watch of the night. Outside the harsh wilderness of Judea slowly awakens under a pale, vast sky, its sharp edges and deep ravines still concealing the predatory movements of those who hunt his life. Yet inside this hidden subterranean chamber, the atmosphere is no longer defined by the cold terror of a fugitive's prison. It has become a sacred cathedral of the soul, a place where the heavy burden of survival is entirely exchanged for the unyielding armor of absolute personal alignment with the heavens. The warrior king stands quietly on the uneven bedrock, his hands extended outward with palms open to the morning air. He does not reach for his sword or check the tension of his bowstring. Instead, he opens the deepest corridors of his conscience to the piercing light of the divine presence. He has watched the arrogant construct their elaborate traps, and he has listened to the deceptive tongues rewrite the history of his loyalty. Now, he appeals directly to the one court that cannot be corrupted by political expediency or human jealousy. Vindicate me, Lord, for I have led a blameless life. I have trusted in the Lord without faltering. He speaks this bold petition into the emerging dawn, his voice resonant with a quiet, unshakable certainty that echoes softly off the damp stone walls. This is not the arrogant boast of a man claiming absolute sinless perfection, but rather the solemn declaration of a servant who has maintained an unswerving functional integrity in the face of relentless temptation. He has chosen to anchor his trust entirely in the character of the Creator, refusing to use the treacherous methods of his adversaries to secure his own safety. Even when the easiest path to survival would have been to repay treachery with treachery, his feet have held fast to the ancient paths of fidelity. The king steps deeper into the light of divine examination, inviting the scrutiny of the Almighty with an unprecedented transparency of heart. Test me, Lord, and try me, he prays, his gaze lifted toward the stone ceiling. Examine my deepest desires, my mind, and my internal heart, for I have always been deeply mindful of your unfailing love, and I have lived my life in complete reliance on your faithfulness. He understands that the ultimate danger of the wilderness is not physical destruction by Saul's army, but the silent corruption of his own inner spirit. He wants to ensure that no root of bitterness, no seed of malice, and no trace of personal vengeance has been permitted to grow within the hidden soil of his soul. He maps out the deliberate choices he has made to preserve his separation from the moral decay of the age, drawing a clear line of demarcation between his life and the strategies of the rebellious. I do not sit with the deceitful, he proclaims into the crisp morning air, nor do I associate with hypocrites who wear a mask of loyalty while harboring treachery in their chests. I completely abhor the assembly of evildoers, and I absolutely refuse to sit in council with the wicked. The Shepherd King recognizes that to walk in divine power, one must protect the environment of their mind, keeping their thoughts completely detached from the cynical manipulations of those who believe they are accountable to no higher throne. The king visualizes his participation in a completely different kind of assembly, a holy gathering defined by purity, worship, and public honor. I wash my hands in absolute innocence, he declares, and so I go about your altar, O Lord, proclaiming aloud your magnificent praise and telling of all your wonderful world-shaking deeds. He sees a future day where his current state of isolation will be exchanged for a glorious public restoration, where the song of the fugitive will become the anthem of a redeemed nation. He nurtures a deep, passionate affection for the dwelling place of the Most High, exclaiming with a heart that is beginning to overflow with genuine joy, Lord, I love the house where you live, the very place where your spectacular glory dwells. Do not sweep my soul away, along with sinners, nor my life with those who are bloodthirsty. He issues a fierce plea against the collective destiny of the wicked, asking that his legacy never be joined with those whose hands are constantly filled with wicked schemes and whose right hands are full of deceptive bribes. He watches the conceptual collapse of the tyrants, knowing that their ill-gotten wealth and their sophisticated conspiracies will eventually pull them down into the dust of an ignored history. But as for me, he counters his posture, straightening with an unyielding, permanent fortitude. I will continue to lead a blameless life. Deliver me from the closing nets of the hunter, and be merciful to my fragile frame. The Shepherd King moves fully out of the shadows of the cave, stepping into the brilliant golden light of the new day at the cavern entrance. He looks down at the rocky ledge beneath his sandals, feeling a profound supernatural stability settle into his body. My feet stand on perfectly level ground, he proclaims, his eyes sweeping across the vast expanse of the desert landscape. In the great congregation I will praise the Lord. He realizes that despite the rugged, the treacherous terrain of the Judean wilderness, his spiritual footing is completely secure. He is no longer a victim hiding in a hole. He is a preserved soul standing firm on the bedrock of an eternal covenant that no human treachery can ever dismantle. The sun has climbed past the visual boundaries of the canyon ridges, flooding the parched Judean landscape with a brilliant, blinding light that exposes every hidden crevice and sharp flint of the earth. Inside the limestone cavern, the deep personal cries for vindication begin to expand into a grander cosmic blueprint. The Shepherd King remains standing near the stone mouth of his refuge, but his spirit is no longer confined to his immediate geography or the tactical movements of Saul's advancing armies. A powerful royal decree echoes through the quiet corridors of his soul, pulling his thoughts up into the high halls of universal governance, where empires are weighed and the ultimate destiny of nations is permanently recorded. The poet king looks across the vast expanse of the historical stage, observing the patterns of human rebellion with a calm, untroubled perspective. He watches as the great kingdoms of the earth exhaust their energies in vanity, their rulers assembling in secret chambers to plot against the design of the Creator. He recognizes that the noise of human conflict is nothing more than a temporary vapor when measured against the unshakable architecture of the heavenly throne. Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? He projects this profound question into the crisp desert air, his voice carrying the deep weight of a prophet who has seen the end of all fleshly ambition. He describes the systematic rebellion of the world's leaders, noting that the kings of the earth rise up in collective defiance and the rulers band themselves together against the Lord and against his anointed king. They look at the moral boundaries of the divine covenant as if they were heavy chains, shouting into the public squares of history, "Let us break their heavy bands asunder, and let us cast off their restrictive shackles from our lives." They believe that through the sheer volume of their numbers and the sophistication of their iron weapons, they can completely erase the Prakas, authority of heaven. Yet the reaction of the celestial court to this massive human uprising is not one of panic or defensive preparation. The king visualizes the absolute serenity of the ultimate ruler, a striking contrast that entirely reframes his understanding of earthly power. The one who sits enthroned in the heavens simply laughs, he proclaims, his eyes reflecting the brilliant light of the morning. The Lord scoffs at their empty boasts and their fragile conspiracies. The Creator does not need to mobilize an army or construct defensive fortifications to protect his rule. His unyielding sovereignty is an absolute reality, before which the proud look incredibly small. The king tracks the sudden, devastating transition from divine amusement to the execution of holy justice. When the hour of testing reaches its fulfillment, the sovereign breaks his silence, rebuking the rebellious leaders in his fierce anger and terrifying them in his hot displeasure. He does not engage in a prolonged negotiation with the tyrants. He simply issues a definitive, unchangeable declaration that cuts through the noise of their conspiracies. "I have installed my chosen king upon Zion, my holy mountain." This royal decree stands as an immovable rock in the center of human history, a permanent boundary that no human hand can ever shift or dismantle. The prophet king steps into the identity of the anointed sovereign, reciting the intimate relational covenant that anchors his public authority. "I will proclaim the Lord's eternal decree," he declares, his posture straightening with the dignity of a royal son. He said to me, "You are my true son. Today I have become your father." This is the ultimate validation of leadership, a authority that is not grabbed through military coups or secured through deceptive flattery, but given directly by the hand of the Creator. The Son is invited to ask of the Father with the absolute assurance that the nations will be made his permanent inheritance and the furthest ends of the earth his ultimate possession. You will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like fragile pottery. He contemplates the complete vulnerability of human systems before the execution of this royal power. He sees the complex structures of oppressive empires, with all their material wealth and their heavy military, might becoming as fragile as clay jars before the strike of an iron scepter. The resistance of the proud will be entirely shattered, leaving no trace of their arrogance in the soil of the earth. This realization brings a wave of deep, unshakable peace to the shepherd king as he stands within his cave. He realizes that his current poverty and isolation are merely a temporary preparation, a brief wilderness forge, before he is brought forth to witness the total collapse of the usurper's house. He shifts his tone from a declaration of judgment to a passionate, merciful warning addressed to the very rulers who have sought his destruction. Therefore, you kings, be wise, he appeals, his voice carrying the deep compassion of a true shepherd. Be thoroughly warned, you rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with profound fear and celebrate his sovereign rule with trembling. He urges them to submit to the authority of the Son, to kiss his hand in genuine allegiance. Before his righteous anger flares up in a brief moment, and their treacherous ways lead to their absolute destruction, the king knows that the path of rebellion is a slippery descent into darkness, and he longs to see the wayward turn back to the source of life. The shepherd king turns back into the quiet interior of his cavern, his spirit completely resting in the final triumphant truth of his meditation. He looks at his simple staff and his unstrung bow, knowing that he requires no physical army to guarantee his future. Blessed are all who take their refuge in him, he concludes, his voice fading into a holy whisper that fills every dark corner of the limestone refuge. He lies down upon the rough earth, completely secure within the invisible pavilion of divine favor. The trackers may continue their search through the deep canyons outside, but their movements are entirely meaningless. The king has been installed, the decree has been spoken, and the servant rests in absolute permanent tranquility. The intense heat of the Judean sun has begun its slow, majestic descent behind the western ridges, casting immense, elongated shadows across the floor of the parched ravines. Inside the hidden perimeter of the limestone cavern, the environment is wrapped in a profound, heavy silence that matches the deep internal shift occurring within the soul of the shepherd king. He sits upon a smooth shelf of stone, his back resting against the subterranean wall, his eyes fixed on the dust beneath his feet. The grand cosmic visions of raging nations and iron scepter victories have receded into the background, leaving him once more in the quiet crucible of his immediate human vulnerability. The physical fatigue of the endless flight through the desert is a real heavy presence in his limbs, but it is the emotional weight of his position that draws a deep, ragged sigh from his chest. He knows that just beyond the jagged mouth of his refuge, the forces of Saul are systematically closing the gaps in the canyon network, searching the caves with the cold determination of hunters tracking a marked beast. In this moment of intense stillness, when the human resource is entirely exhausted, the king does not allow his mind to drift toward the paralysis of fear. He opens his heart to the silence, transforming the quiet space of the cave into a direct, unmediated conversation with the living Creator. Listen to my raw words, O Lord. Consider the deep weight of my sorrowful lament. He whispers this plea into the emerging shadows of the cave, his voice carrying the pure, unfiltered vulnerability of a servant who has reached the end of his own strength. He does not approach the throne of heaven with elaborate religious pretense or carefully rehearsed formulas of statecraft. He lays his naked soul before the gaze of the sovereign, requesting that the master of the cosmos lean down to hear the quiet, fractured cry for help that rises from his parched throat. He addresses the Creator with titles that define the hierarchy of his allegiance, proclaiming into the dim stone spaces, my King and my God, for to you alone do I direct my desperate prayer." The king establishes a permanent, disciplined rhythm for his spiritual life, a deliberate strategy of devotion that anchors his mind before the problems of the day can flood his consciousness. "In the early morning, Lord, you will consistently hear my voice," he declares, his posture straightening with a quiet resolve. "In the morning, I will intentionally lay my structured requests before your presence, and I will wait expectantly with an unswerving watchfulness." He refuses to allow the unexpected crises of his exile to dictate the schedule of his heart. Before he looks at the movements of the enemy's banners or listens to the reports of his scouts, he will fix his eyes on the vertical reality of the divine character. He anchors his confidence in the moral purity of the sovereign, drawing comfort from the absolute incompatibility between the divine nature and the strategies of his persecutors. "For you are not a God who takes any pleasure in wickedness," he observes his words, casting a brilliant light into the dark corners of his shelter. "With your holy character, evil people are completely unwelcome. They find no sanctuary in your courts. The arrogant and the boastful cannot stand in your immediate presence, for you naturally hate all those who practice iniquity. You will ruthlessly destroy those who tell systematic lies, and the bloodthirsty, deceitful plotters are an absolute detestation to the soul of the Lord." This theological certainty provides an immediate healing clarity for the shepherd king as he measures his own standing before the heavenly court. He looks down at his dust-stained hands and his simple tunic, realizing that his survival does not depend on the absence of trouble, but on the presence of alignment. He knows that his enemies, with all their political sophistication and military dominance, have aligned themselves with the shadows of deceit, while his own cause is anchored in the light of absolute truth. The knowledge that the supreme judge naturally opposes the treacherous gives him an internal fortress that no earthly army can ever breach or undermine. "But as for me, by your immense, unfailing love, I can freely come into your glorious house." The poet king marvels at the radical access he has been granted, recognizing that his presence in the divine sanctuary is not earned by his own flawless performance, but secured by the ocean of covenant mercy that flows from the throne. He visualizes himself entering the grand courts of the tabernacle, his heart completely saturated with a holy awe that drives out every trace of human panic. "In deep reverence, I will bow down toward your holy temple," he vows, aligning his entire internal world with the structural order of heaven. This is the posture of a true son, a humble submission that finds its supreme freedom in the service of the King of Kings. He requests a precise, detailed guidance for his steps, knowing that the terrain he navigates is filled with hidden hazards and treacherous traps. "Lead me, Lord, in your absolute righteousness, because of the persistent watchfulness of my enemies," he petitions. "Make your unique way completely straight and obvious before my face." He understands that the best defense against a deceptive foe is a life lived in uncompromised clarity. He does not ask for a sudden shortcut out of the wilderness or a miraculous destruction of his problems. He asks for the moral stamina and the spiritual vision to walk the straight line of equity without turning to the left or to the takif, right? He turns his analytical gaze back toward the character of his pursuers, exposing the deep internal corruption that drives their systematic campaign of slander. "Not a single word from their mouth can ever be trusted," he notes with a voice that carries the gravity of a judicial sentence. "Their innermost heart is entirely filled with malice and destruction. Their throat is a wide-open grave, exhaling the stench of decay and ruin into the public squares of the nation, while they use their smooth, flattering tongues to tell elaborate lies that trap the unsuspecting. They are professional architects of deception, using their speech to dismantle the honor of the innocent and secure their own illegitimate power. Declare them guilty, O my God. Let their own complex intrigues be their ultimate downfall. The king calls for the execution of perfect justice, praying that the spiritual laws of sowing and reaping run their natural, uninterrupted course in the arena of his trial. He asks that the plotters be completely ensnared by the very strategies they devised in their hidden chambers, letting their personal pride serve as the mechanism of their public execution. Banish them from your presence, for the sheer multitude of their transgressions, he declares. For their rebellion is not merely directed at a human fugitive in a cave, but targeted at the divine order that he represents. The king knows that a house built on a foundation of lies cannot stand when the wind of divine judgment begins to blow. Yet as he contemplates the inevitable ruin of the deceitful, his spirit rises into a glorious celebratory anthem for the family of faith. But let all who take their refuge in you be genuinely glad, he exclaims, his heart overflowing with an unshakable permanent joy. Let them ever sing for joy because you spread your protective canopy over their lives. He sees a magnificent sanctuary where those who love the name of the Lord can rejoice in his presence, completely undisturbed by the noise of the world outside. Surely, Lord, you bless the righteous, he concludes, his voice filling the deep spaces of the cavern with a triumphant resonance. You surround them with your favor as with an impenetrable shield. The shepherd king rests his head back against the limestone wall, his mind entirely quieted by the reality of this divine shield. He understands that the invisible favor of his protector is wrapped completely around his fragile life, rendering the physical weapons of his pursuers entirely obsolete. He is no longer a victim waiting for an executioner in a dark hole. He is a preserved soul, standing firm within the secure boundaries of an eternal covenant. The darkness of the Judean night may continue to deepen outside the cave entrance, but inside the sanctuary of his heart, the morning has already arrived, and the song of perfect trust will never cease to echo through the corridors of his life. The deep, heavy mantle of the desert midnight settles completely over the jagged terrain of the Judean wilderness, plunging the limestone canyons into an absolute unyielding dark. Outside the narrow opening of the cave, the cold desert wind sweeps across the lonely ridges with a low, mournful sigh, driving the loose white dust through the dry brush and into the shadows. Inside the cavern, the brilliant atmosphere of royal favor and majestic protection that had illuminated the shepherd king's mind seems to evaporate, leaving behind the raw, cold reality of intense human suffering. The spiritual warrior finds himself suddenly pulled down into the deep, dark valleys of an agonizing physical and emotional crisis, where the immediate pressure of his frailty threatens to swallow his hope entirely. He does not stand with the bold confidence of a conqueror tonight. Instead, his physical frame is bowed low toward the dust of the cave floor, his hands pressed tightly against his aching temples. The long months of relentless flight, the constant lack of adequate nourishment, and the suffocating psychological strain of being hunted by his own king have finally broken through his physical defenses. His body is a landscape of deep exhaustion. His bones ache with a searing agony, and his spirit is completely compressed by a heavy wave of internal grief. In this unguarded hour of deep midnight, when the human resource is entirely depleted, his voice rises from the dust, not in a song of triumph, but in a fractured, desperate cry for mercy. Lord, do not rebuke me in your fierce anger, nor discipline me in your hot wrath. He whispers this heavy plea into the thick gloom, his words carrying the absolute unfiltered vulnerability of a child, crying out to a father in the middle of a terrifying storm. He does not attempt to hide his weakness or mask his flaws beneath a performance of absolute spiritual stoicism. He recognizes that before the blinding purity of the sovereign judge, his own life is completely fragile, and his errors are fully exposed. He begs the Almighty to stay the hand of severe discipline, requesting that the correction of heaven be administered through the gentle channel of covenant compassion, rather than the devastating torrent of holy indignation. The king describes his internal and external condition with striking, painful transparency, laying bare the absolute limits of his human endurance. "Have mercy on me, Lord, for I am faint," he groans, his forehead resting against the cold stone floor. "Heal me, O my master, for my very bones are in deep agony. My soul is trapped in a state of profound anguish, wandering through a labyrinth of sorrow that has no obvious exit." He feels as though his entire life is dissolving into the dirt, as though the physical structures of his body are collapsing under the immense weight of his emotional isolation. He looks up toward the dark ceiling of his stone prison, issuing a short, desperate question that has echoed through the centuries of human grief. "How long, Lord? How long must this midnight endure before the light breaks?" The petitioner shifts his posture slightly, turning his eyes toward the unseen throne of grace as he pleads for a swift manifestation of divine advocacy. "Turn, Lord, and deliver my soul," he petitions, his voice trembling with raw emotion. "Save me because of your unchanging, unfailing love." He understands that his survival cannot be bought by his own past achievements, nor can it be secured by his personal merits. He anchors his entire legal case for rescue in the intrinsic goodness of the Creator's character. He reminds the sovereign of the eternal purpose of his life, asking with absolute honesty what benefit the kingdom of heaven would receive if his story were cut short in the wilderness. "Among the dead who can proclaim your name, who praises you from the damp silence of the grave." The king maps out the daily reality of his emotional exhaustion, providing a vivid portrait of a spirit completely worn out by continuous groaning. "All night long I flood my bed with weeping," he confesses into the quiet dark, drenched in the tears of my own sorrow. "My eyes grow weak and fail because of all my grief. They grow dim because of the constant presence of my adversaries." He describes a sorrow so deep that it physically compromises his vision, clouding his ability to see the path ahead or discern the movements of the dawn. He feels entirely spent, a broken vessel poured out in the secret places of the earth, completely dependent on an immediate breakthrough of divine healing. "Away from me, all you who practice evil, for the Lord has heard the voice of my weeping." Yet, in the very middle of this deep physical and emotional collapse, a sudden miraculous pivot occurs within the hidden chambers of his spirit. The tearful cry of the broken man does not vanish into the stone walls as wasted breath. It connects with the living heart of the Creator. A deep, quiet wave of absolute certainty begins to kindle within his bruised chest, expanding until it drives out the paralysis of despair. The shepherd king lifts his head from the dust, his eyes flashing with a renewed authority, as he addresses the unseen presence of the mockers and the deceivers who have celebrated his apparent downfall. He issues a definitive command of banishment against the workers of iniquity, declaring that his tears have been officially translated into a powerful weapon of spiritual warfare. The king lists the legal verdicts that have just been handed down from the high courts of heaven, his voice gaining a resonant, unshakable strength that fills the entire cavern. "The Lord has thoroughly heard my cry for mercy," he proclaims, his posture straightening against the limestone wall. "The Lord accepts my desperate prayer." This is the turning point of his midnight struggle. He realizes that the silence of his protector was not a sign of distance or apathy, but the quiet gathering of an unstoppable deliverance. The political maneuvers of his pursuers and the slanderous words of the corrupt are completely rendered void by the single sovereign acceptance of his petition. The warrior visualizes the immediate devastating reversal of roles that awaits his persecutors when the divine verdict is manifested in the open fields. "All my enemies will be completely overwhelmed with shame and deep anguish," he declares, watching the conceptual undoing of their strategies. They will be forced to turn back in absolute confusion, and they will suddenly be put to open shame before the eyes of the entire nation. The very individuals who ground their teeth in malicious glee at the prospect of his ruin will find their own networks dismantled, their power shattered, and their pride buried in the dust of their own making. The innocent wanderer will stand secure while the tyrants crumble under the weight of their own choices. The shepherd king moves closer to the entrance of the cave, his body still marked by the physical fatigue of his trial, but his spirit completely resting in a permanent, unshakable peace. He looks out at the pale, emerging lines of the new dawn, knowing that his life is entirely safe within the secure boundaries of an eternal covenant. The darkness of his grief has been permanently broken by the light of divine acceptance, and the cavern has been transformed from a house of agony into a sanctuary of praise. He draws a deep, clean breath of the crisp morning air, completely resolved to walk forward into the destiny prepared for him, knowing that the true shepherd of Israel never slumbers and never fails to deliver his own. The pale initial streams of the morning sun climb steadily past the jagged eastern peaks, painting the dry, fractured walls of the Judean wilderness in rich tones of amber and rust. Inside the quiet parameters of the limestone cave, the deep, agonizing groans of the previous watch have completely subsided, leaving behind an absolute, pristine stillness. The shepherd king sits upright upon the hard bedrock, his legs crossed, his worn hands resting open upon his knees. His physical body is still recovering from the heavy exhaustion that had compressed his spirit during the midnight hour, but his internal landscape has undergone a radical, majestic reorientation. The dark shadows of personal despair have been completely driven away by a glorious rising tide of celestial inspiration. He reaches out his hand to touch the wood of his simple 10-stringed lyre, which has leaned silently against the cavern wall throughout his long flight. As his fingers gently brush across the tightly wound strings, a clear, resonant chord rings out into the stone chamber, vibrating through the quiet air and driving out the final lingering whispers of heavy worry. This is not a time for defensive pleas or strategic petitions. It is a moment for a magnificent, uncompromised anthem of corporate praise. The Holy Spirit fills his chest with a powerful creative melody that lifts his thoughts completely out of his localized cave and connects his spirit with the universal rhythms of a faithful creation. Sing joyfully to the Lord, you righteous. It is fitting for the upright to praise him with all their heart. He projects this grand invitation into the crisp morning air, his voice carrying the deep, clear resonance of a master herald, summoning an entire nation to worship. He declares that praise is not a burdensome duty or a hollow ritual, but the natural, beautiful clothing of a soul that has been aligned with the equity of heaven. He commands the faithful to awaken their instruments of music, to praise the Lord with the deep resonance of the harp, and to make skillful music to him upon the 10-stringed lyre. He urges them to sing a completely new song of victory, to play with profound technical mastery, and to lift their voices in a magnificent, joyful shout that echoes across the geography of the earth. The king defines the solid, unshakable foundation upon which this corporate praise is built, anchoring his lyrics in the unchangeable character of the Creator. For the word of the Lord is fundamentally right and true, he proclaims, his eyes reflecting the brilliant light of the new day. He is completely faithful in absolutely everything he executes. The Lord possesses an intense, permanent love for righteousness and perfect justice. The entire earth is completely full of his constant, unfailing love. The king looks out from the mouth of his refuge at the sun-bleached desert, realizing that even this harsh, barren wilderness is saturated with the invisible protective care of the Almighty. He expands his song into a breathtaking meditation on the cosmic power of the divine voice, mapping out the architecture of creation to demonstrate the absolute insignificance of human opposition. By the simple word of the Lord, the vast heavens were masterfully constructed, and the entire starry host was brought into existence by the mere breath of his mouth. He gathers the chaotic waters of the sea together as into a single jar, and he places the deep, roaring oceans into his secure cosmic storehouses. This striking imagery completely reframes the king's perspective on his own problems. If the oceans are merely small jars in the hands of his protector, then the armies of Saul are nothing more than dust on the wind. The poet king calls upon the entire global community to bow in absolute reverence before this manifestation of supreme authority. Let all the earth fear the Lord, he declares, his voice gathering a powerful momentum. Let all the citizens of the world stand in profound awe of his presence. For he spoke a single word, and it immediately came to be. He issued a sovereign command, and it stood permanently firm across the centuries of history. No human conspiracy, no military coup, and no network of deceptive lies can ever alter or overturn a reality that has been anchored by the decree of the sovereign architect. The Lord completely foils the complex plans of the nations. He thwarts the deceptive purposes of the human populations. He looks down at the historical stage, watching the rise and fall of arrogant empires with a calm, untroubled perspective. He notes that while human rulers spend their brief years under the sun, constructing elaborate conspiracies to bypass the laws of heaven, their strategies are systematically turned into complete vanity by the intervention of the Most High. But the plans of the Lord stand absolutely firm forever, the king exclaims, his heart overflowing with a deep stability. The righteous purposes of his heart endure intact through all generations. Blessed is the entire nation whose God is the Lord, the chosen people whom he has personally selected for his permanent inheritance. The king tracks the precise, all-seeing gaze of the sovereign judge, who watches over the human race from his high heavenly sanctuary. From his majestic dwelling place, the Lord looks down and sees all mankind, thoroughly observing every individual who lives on the face of the earth. He is the unique one who forms the hearts of all men, intimately understanding every hidden motive and considering absolutely everything they execute in the secret places of their lives. He is not fooled by external armor or the size of a military parade. He looks directly at the structural integrity of the inner spirit, validating the humble and exposing the proud. He exposes the absolute futility of human self-reliance, dismantling the confidence of those who place their trust in material dominance or physical strength. No earthly king is ever saved by the sheer size of his massive army. The poet king observes his words carrying the weight of an ancient axiom. No mighty warrior escapes his destiny by his great physical strength alone. A war horse is a completely vain, empty hope for securing deliverance despite all its magnificent strength. It cannot buy a single moment of safety when the hour of testing arrives. The complex networks of human defense are completely rendered useless when they are misaligned with the purposes of the cosmos. But the eyes of the Lord are continuously on those who fear him, on those whose hope is firmly fixed in his unfailing love. The Shepherd King brings his magnificent symphony to a triumphant, deeply personal peak, highlighting the exact coordinates of divine protection. The gaze of the Almighty is not fixed on the proud or the powerful, but settled firmly upon the humble souls who anchor their survival in his covenant mercy. The Lord watches over them to deliver their fragile lives from premature death and to keep them actively alive and flourishing during times of absolute famine and desolation. This assurance provides an immediate, permanent shield for the king's mind, transforming his rocky hiding place into a safe pavilion of peace. He stands fully exposed to the golden morning light at the entrance of the cave, his fingers striking a final sweeping chord upon the strings of his lyre. We wait in quiet hope for the Lord," he concludes, his voice filling every deep space of the limestone canyon with a resonant certainty. He alone is our ultimate help and our impenetrable shield. In him, our hearts genuinely rejoice because we have placed our absolute trust in his holy name. May your constant, unfailing love rest upon us. O Lord, even as we place our unswerving hope entirely in you. He lays his instrument down completely, ready to face whatever the day brings, knowing that his life is permanently secured by the Maker of the stars. Stay anchored in the Word. The magnificent world-shaking truths of the Psalms are designed to give us an unshakable confidence when we feel completely outnumbered by the circumstances of life. We are on a deeply transformative 30-part journey through the Cave of David, and we don't want you to miss a single step of this spiritual alignment. If your faith was strengthened by this powerful symphony of trust, please take a moment to subscribe to the Christian Storytelling channel right now. By clicking that subscribe button and turning on the notification bell, you ensure that every chapter of this emotionally rich scriptural narrative is delivered straight to your feed. Let's keep our minds anchored together in the beauty of the Word. See you in next part. The blazing heat of the morning progresses into the heavy, unyielding brilliance of midday, transforming the jagged limestone canyons of Judea into a vast furnace of white rock and shimmering air. Outside the narrow shelter of the cavern, the landscape seems to warp under the intense weight of the sun, and the sparse vegetation clings desperately to the dry flint of the earth. Inside the deep subterranean refuge, the majestic sweeping chords of corporate praise have faded into an absolute, intimate silence. The shepherd king sits near the cool stone perimeter of his hiding place, his hands clasped around his knees, his eyes reflecting the sharp light that cuts through the opening of his sanctuary. He has traveled through the grand legal courtrooms of the cosmos and witnessed the cosmic collapse of the proud. But now his spirit enters a deeply personal internal wilderness. The physical thirst of a fugitive hiding in a parched desert becomes a vivid, powerful metaphor for the intense spiritual hunger that grips his innermost being. He is not merely running from the physical spears of an earthly army. He is enduring a profound season of spiritual exile, cut off from the organized worship of the tabernacle and the comforting fellowship of the community of faith. In this quiet hour of solitary testing, his heart opens completely to reveal a passionate, uncompromised longing for the direct presence of the living Creator. As the weary deer pants for flowing streams of water, so my soul desperately pants for you, my God. He whispers this iconic lamentation into the quiet shadows of the stone chamber, his voice carrying the deep, resonant ache of a soul that refuses to be satisfied with anything less than the divine. He describes an absolute consuming thirst that bypasses the superficial desires of the flesh to target the very core of his identity. My entire soul thirsts deeply for God, he confesses, for the actual living God who holds the breath of all creation in his hand. He is tired of the dry dust of human conflict, the empty promises of politicians, and the heavy atmosphere of betrayal. He longs to drink from the eternal fountain of life that flows from the throne of grace, a water that heals the broken spirit and restores the weary mind. The king confronts the agonizing questions that haunt his isolation, identifying the deep emotional wounds inflicted by the continuous mockery of his persecutors. Where can I go so that I may finally meet face to face with my God? He asks, his voice tinged with a heavy, honest sorrow. He notes that his tears have become his primary food day and night, an unceasing reminder of his vulnerability, while his enemies taunt his faith all day long, whispering their cynical questions into the desert wind. Where is your God now? Where is the divine protection you boasted of in the public squares? They look at his physical isolation in the cave and conclude that he has been completely abandoned by the heavens. The petitioner battles the onset of discouragement by deliberately engaging the faculty of his memory, using the recorded history of his past devotion as a strategic weapon to stabilize his current emotions. These specific things I carefully remember as I pour out my soul within me. He reflects, his eyes closing to visualize a grander reality. He recalls a time when he used to walk with the vast multitudes of the nation, leading a grand, joyous procession to the house of God under the direct, protective care of the Mighty One. He remembers the atmosphere of corporate celebration, the magnificent shouts of joy and praise that rose from the festive throng as they marched together into the sacred courts of the sanctuary. Why, my soul, are you so downcast within me? Why are you so deeply disturbed within my chest? He turns his analytical gaze inward, confronting his own emotional paralysis with a powerful, authoritative self-examination. He refuses to allow his feelings to dictate the reality of his faith. He challenges the heavy, downcast posture of his spirit, demanding to know why his inner being is pacing through the labyrinth of anxiety and sorrow. Put your absolute hope firmly in God. He commands his own heart, his voice gaining a sudden, unyielding strength that cuts through the darkness of his cave. For I will yet publicly praise him, my ultimate Savior and my unchangeable God. He recognizes that his current state of depression is a temporary cloud that must eventually scatter before the light of the divine countenance. The king describes the deep geographical and spiritual distance he feels mapping out his displacement from the center of spiritual life. My soul is heavily downcast within me, he admits with transparent honesty. Therefore, I will intentionally remember your faithfulness from the rugged land of the Jordan, from the massive heights of Mount Hermon, and from the small, lonely peak of Mount Mizar. He realizes that his worship is not dependent on a specific physical location. He can build an altar of remembrance in the furthest corners of exile. Even here, in the middle of a desolate limestone maze, he can connect his mind with the ancient stream of covenant mercy that has sustained the righteous through countless generations. He uses the majestic, terrifying imagery of a natural torrent to describe the overwhelming intensity of his current trial, framing his suffering as a part of a divine process. Deep calls directly to deep in the deafening roar of your waterfalls, he exclaims, his heart vibrating with the power of the metaphor. All your massive waves and your crashing breakers have swept completely over my head. He feels as though he is being submerged beneath a vast ocean of affliction, a flood of circumstantial pressure that threatens to drown his human resource. Yet, even in the middle of the deluge, he recognizes that the waves belong to his master. It is not the enemy's water that tests him, but the Lord's absolute discipline that refines him. By day the Lord actively directs his unfailing love, and at night his song remains firmly with me. The shepherd king discovers a beautiful dual rhythm of grace that sustains his life through the alternating cycles of light and darkness. He declares that throughout the blazing hours of the day, the Creator sends out a deliberate commission of unswerving mercy to guard his steps, and during the lonely watch of the night, a holy melody rises from the depths of his soul, serving as a direct, intimate prayer to the God of his life. This hidden music becomes an impenetrable fortress for his mind, ensuring that his thoughts remain completely anchored in truth, even when the physical variables of danger are at their most menacing. He presents his raw legal complaint before his protector, refusing to mask his internal struggle behind a performance of superficial peace. I will say to God, my rock, why have you completely forgotten me? Why must I continuously go about mourning because of the severe oppression of my fierce enemy? He describes the intense physical pain that accompanies psychological warfare, noting that his bones suffer a mortal agony as his foes taunt him with their continuous cynical question, "Where is your God?" This is a raw, unedited glimpse into the reality of faith under fire, a demonstration that a believer can experience severe emotional pressure while maintaining an unbroken commitment to the throne. He brings his passionate meditation to a decisive, recurring peak, using the exact same authoritative command to master his emotions once more. Why, my soul, are you so downcast? Why are you so deeply disturbed within me? Put your hope completely in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God. He stands up from the stone floor, his posture completely relaxed, his face illuminated by a sudden ray of midday sun that pierces a vertical crack in the cave ceiling. He realizes that the thirst of his soul is already being quenched by the very act of seeking his master. The cave is no longer a place of barren exile. It has become a deep well of living water, and the king rests in absolute permanent tranquility. The heavy, unyielding heat of the desert afternoon begins to settle deeply into the ancient stone floor of the Judean cavern. Outside the world is a harsh expanse of blinding light and jagged rock, where the armies of the usurper continue their methodical search through the winding valleys. Inside the subterranean sanctuary, the atmosphere has shifted into a quiet, solemn chamber of self-examination and judicial reflection. The shepherd king sat on a rough ledge of granite, his head resting against the cool limestone wall, his hands loose and open. He has navigated the depths of raw emotional thirst and wrestled with the downcast movements of his own spirit. Now his mind enters a space of profound ethical evaluation, looking at the ultimate nature of leadership and the absolute defense that belongs to those who walk in genuine compassion. He has witnessed how easily power can corrupt the human heart, transforming chosen rulers into paranoid tyrants who use their vast resources to exploit the weak and hunt down the loyal. He has seen a kingdom fractured by suspicion, where empty flattery is highly rewarded and quiet integrity is treated as a dangerous conspiracy. But as he sits in the stillness of his cave, a beautiful, comforting truth begins to illuminate his thoughts. He realizes that the ultimate protection of a human life does not depend on the size of an army, the sophistication of an iron weapon, or the security of a walled fortress. True safety is an intrinsic shield that wraps itself around those who choose the path of active, unselfish mercy toward the vulnerable. Blessed are those who have deep regard for the weak. The Lord will deliver them in their times of trouble. He speaks this profound axiom into the quiet shadows of the stone room, his voice carrying the calm, steady weight of a true sage. He establishes a foundational law of the spiritual universe. The way we treat the helpless in their hour of need determines the way the heavens will treat us in our hour of testing. He declares that the individual who actively considers the plight of the poor, the brokenhearted, and the marginalized is marked by a unique divine favor. When the inevitable days of personal calamity arrive, when the nets of the hunter close in, and human options are completely exhausted, the Creator will personally step down into the arena to execute a swift supernatural rescue on behalf of the merciful. The king lists the specific covenants of protection that are automatically deployed around the life of the compassionate person. His words, building an impenetrable wall of security. The Lord will actively protect them and preserve their lives, he proclaims, his eyes reflecting the soft light of the afternoon. They will be counted among the truly blessed in the land of promise. He will absolutely refuse to give them over to the desperate desires of their fierce enemies. This assurance brings an immediate healing comfort to his own situation. He realizes that because his life has been dedicated to sheltering the vulnerable, his own survival is guaranteed by an eternal contract that no earthly monarch can ever cancel or override. He reflects on the intimate care that the sovereign provides during seasons of physical vulnerability, using the vivid imagery of a gentle healer. The Lord sustains them upon their sickbed, he notes with a tone of quiet awe, and restores them entirely from their bed of illness. He understands that the protective coverage of heaven extends to the deepest details of human frailty, watching over the body and the mind when strength has completely failed. He models the response of the humble soul under this realization, turning his meditation into a transparent prayer for personal cleansing. I said, Lord, have mercy on me. Heal my soul, for I have sinned against you. He knows that true health begins with a conscience washed clean of any hidden compromise. My enemies speak of me with absolute malice, asking, when will he finally die, and when will his name perish? The king turns his analytical gaze back toward the immediate reality of his trial, providing a devastating psychological profile of the deceivers who surround his path. He exposes the utter superficiality of their social interactions, describing a pattern of behavior that relies entirely on duplication and slander. When one of them comes to visit me under the pretense of friendship, he observes his words, stripping away their mask of loyalty. His mouth speaks empty, false words, while his heart actively gathers mischief. The moment he steps out of my presence and goes out into the public squares, he immediately spreads his venomous slander around the community, attempting to dismantle my honor before the nation. He tracks the clandestine movements of the conspiracy, watching as his adversaries attempt to construct a false narrative to justify his execution. All my enemies whisper together against me in the shadows, he notes, his voice remaining calm and undisturbed. They imagine the worst possible scenarios for my destiny, saying to themselves, a vile, incurable disease has afflicted his body. He will never again rise up from the place where he lies. They look at his physical isolation in the cave and his apparent weakness, attempting to use the volume of their lies to convince the population that he has been permanently discarded by the heavens. The king confronts the sharpest, most painful point of his betrayal, naming an experience that has broken the hearts of many leaders throughout history. Even my close friend, someone I trusted completely, one who regularly shared my bread at the table, has lifted his heel against me. This is the ultimate sting of the wilderness, the realization that those who benefited most from his past generosity have become the architects of his current distress. They have used their intimate knowledge of his life to design traps from the shadows, trading years of shared history for a brief moment of political advantage. Yet the king refuses to allow the bitter taste of betrayal to poison the dynamic of his faith. But may you have mercy on me, O Lord, raise me up, so that I may properly repay them. He lifts his arms toward the unseen throne of grace, his prayer moving from a quiet lamentation into a powerful command for corporate restoration. He is not requesting permission to execute a campaign of personal vengeance born of human malice. He is calling for his public elevation so that he can fulfill his duty as the anointed judge of the nation, restoring moral order, correcting the systemic injustices of the land, and balancing the scales of equity. He knows that his survival will serve as an undeniable monument to the reliability of the divine standard, proving to the entire world that a life anchored in integrity will always outshine the temporary success of the treacherous. The Shepherd King experiences a sudden, magnificent breakthrough of absolute assurance within the quiet spaces of his chest. I know with absolute certainty that you are well pleased with me, he exclaims, his posture straightening with an unyielding, permanent fortitude, because my fierce enemy does not triumph over me. Because of my uncompromised integrity, you actively uphold my life and set me securely in your presence forever. He realizes that the true verdict of his destiny has already been spoken in the high halls of universal governance, rendering the whispers of the mockers completely useless. He concludes his magnificent meditation with a glorious doxology that transcends the limitations of his current exile, his voice filling every deep corner of the limestone cavern with a triumphant resonance. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Amen and amen. He stands up from the stone floor, his spirit completely detached from the panic of the world, entirely resting within the secure pavilion of divine favor. The trackers may continue their search through the deep ravines outside, but their movements are nothing more than a passing shadow. The king is upheld, his integrity is validated, and he rests in perfect, permanent tranquility. The late afternoon light begins to fracture across the jagged ridges of the Judean wilderness, stretching massive skeletal shadows across the floor of the parched ravines. Inside the hidden perimeter of the limestone cavern, the deep, comforting atmosphere of an upright conscience is suddenly shattered by a violent, unexpected wave of spiritual and emotional crisis. The shepherd king sat on the uneven bedrock, his hands gripping the cold stone ledge until his knuckles turn white. The high ground of judicial peace vanishes in an instant, replaced by a sudden, terrifying sensation of drowning in an absolute ocean of unprovoked hostility. The spiritual warrior finds himself pulled down into the absolute lowest depths of a suffocating trial, where the sheer volume of his adversity threatens to overwhelm his mind. He does not stand with the quiet dignity of a judge tonight. His physical frame is bent low, his chest heaving under the immense weight of an acute, raw panic that sweeps through his nervous system. The long, exhausting months of running from Saul's trackers, the constant isolation from his family, and the heavy burden of carrying the future of a fractured nation have created a reservoir of hidden trauma that now breaks through his emotional defenses. He feels entirely submerged, an island of grief, caught in a furious, rising tide of human malice that leaves no room for his feet to find a stable foothold. In this unguarded, desperate hour, his voice rises from the damp gloom of the cave, a raw, piercing cry for immediate celestial intervention. Save me, O God, for the raging waters have come up to my very neck. He hurls this desperate petition into the quiet shadows of the cavern, his words carrying the frantic, unfiltered terror of a man who feels the cold currents of destruction closing over his breath. He describes his spiritual condition with striking graphic imagery, confessing that he sinks helplessly into the miry depths, where there is absolutely no solid ground to stand upon. He has come into the deep, turbulent waters, and the raging floods engulf his fragile frame on every side. He is completely worn out from his continuous calling for help. His throat is parched and raw from his groaning, and his eyes fail and grow exceptionally dim as he looks toward the horizon for a single sign of his God. The king quantifies the overwhelming scale of the opposition that has gathered to witness his absolute destruction, exposing the irrational nature of the coup. Those who hate me without a single reason outnumber the very hairs of my head, he groans, his forehead resting against the dust. Many are my fierce enemies without cause, those who are actively seeking to destroy my life from the shadows. He describes a grotesque distortion of justice, where he is forced to restore what he did not steal, a target of fabricated crimes and political theater designed to convert his past achievements into public monuments of shame. He feels completely isolated, stripped of his reputation and abandoned to the mercy of a predatory horde. He opens the deepest, most vulnerable chambers of his soul to the scrutiny of the supreme judge, refusing to hide his confusion or mask his human errors behind a performance of flawless perfection. You, God, know my absolute folly, he admits, with transparent honesty, and my guilt is not hidden from your sight. He understands that before the blinding holiness of the Creator, no human life is free from blemish. Yet his primary concern is not his personal survival, but the spiritual reputation of the wider community of faith. He petitions the sovereign Lord Almighty that those who place their hope in the divine covenant may never be disgraced because of his current brokenness, praying that those who seek the Lord may never be put to open shame because of his public humiliation. For I endure bitter scorn for your sake, and shame completely covers my face. The king maps out the profound social alienation that has turned his life into a barren wilderness, laying bare the painful fractures within his own household. He confesses that he has become a complete foreigner to his own family, an absolute stranger to his own mother's children. The burning zeal for the house of the Creator has consumed his entire existence, and the insults of those who insult the heavens have fallen directly upon his own shoulders. When he chose to weep and chasten his soul with rigorous fasting, he had to endure the cruel mockery of the elite when he put on sackcloth to mourn the state of the nation. People made sport of his grief in the public squares. Those who sit at the city gates gossip about his downfall, and he has become the mocking song of the drunkards in the taverns. Yet in the very middle of this deep, watery abyss, the Shepherd King executes a brilliant, strategic pivot within the hidden chambers of his chest. He refuses to allow the mockery of the crowds to dictate the trajectory of his prayer. "But I pray to you, Lord, in the time of your sovereign favor," he exclaims, his voice gaining a sudden, unyielding strength that cuts through the noise of his panic. "In your great unchanging love, O God, answer my cry with your sure salvation." He calls upon the Master of the Cosmos to rescue his life from the mire, to prevent his feet from sinking deeper into the quicksand of despair, and to deliver his soul from the deep, suffocating waters of human hatred. He targets the closing mouth of the trap, praying that the ultimate finality of ruin be completely denied. "Do not let the violent floodwaters engulf me," he begs, "nor let the deep abyss swallow me up completely, or the pit close its heavy jaws over my head. Answer me, Lord, out of the magnificent goodness of your unfailing love. In your immense mercy, turn your face toward my fragile frame." He demands that the passive silence of the heavens be broken by an immediate breakthrough of divine advocacy, requesting that the Creator come near to his soul, rescue his life from the lions, and deliver his destiny because of the continuous watchfulness of his foes. "You know how I am scorned, disgraced, and shamed. All my adversaries are fully before your sight." The king describes the deep psychological trauma of his isolation, exposing the total absence of human empathy in the arena of his trial. "Bitter scorn has completely broken my heart," he whispers into the dark stone room, leaving me entirely helpless and crushed in spirit. I looked intently for a single sign of sympathy, but there was absolutely none. I searched for comforters, but I found not a single one to stand by my side. Instead of offering a cup of restoration to a weary soul, his enemies put gall in his food and gave him sour vinegar for his burning thirst. They have used his vulnerability as an opportunity to amplify his pain, celebrating his agony with the cold satisfaction of monsters. The Shepherd King stands to his feet in the middle of the dark cave, his body still trembling from the intensity of his emotional storm, but his spirit beginning to re-anchor itself on the bedrock of divine equity. He knows that his case has been officially recorded in the high court of the cosmos, and that the single acceptance of his petition by the Almighty renders the shouting of the mockers completely useless. He moves closer to the entrance of the cave, looking out at the dark Judean night with a heart that is resolved to endure. The waters may have come up to his neck, and the floods may rage in the ravines below, but the king is anchored in an eternal covenant, and the song of his deliverance will never be silenced by the noise of the deep. The deep, heavy darkness of the Judean night begins to dissolve into a soft, steel-gray mist as the final watch approaches its end. Inside the limestone parameters of the cavern, the violent, suffocating waves of emotional crisis that had threatened to drown the Shepherd King have completely receded, leaving behind a crisp, clean stillness. The warrior sits near the center of his stone room, his posture relaxed, his hands resting loose upon his knees. His breathing is deep and rhythmic. matching the cool currents of the pre-dawn air that drift through the crevices of his sanctuary. He has survived the depths of the watery abyss, and his spirit has emerged from the torrent with an unyielding, pristine clarity that transforms his rocky hiding place into an impenetrable citadel of faith. He reaches into the shadows to draw his rough outer cloak more tightly around his shoulders, his eyes fixed on the narrow opening of the cave, where the first pale light of the morning begins to sketch the contours of the distant peaks. He understands that the trackers are still out there, their camps scattered throughout the winding ravines below their weapons, prepared for an immediate assault. Yet, the tactical advantages of his enemies have completely lost their power to disrupt the internal sanctuary of his mind. He has traded the frantic calculations of human survival for a permanent, unshakable confidence in the protective name of the Lord, a shift that redefines his status from a hunted fugitive to a commander of a heavenly narrative. May the Lord answer you when you are in deep distress. May the name of the God of Jacob protect you completely. He speaks this magnificent priestly benediction into the emerging dawn, his voice carrying a resonant structural strength that fills every dark corner of the limestone cavern. He is no longer merely presenting his personal case before the throne of grace. He is acting as a spiritual guardian for his loyal companions and for all the generations of believers who will one day find themselves cornered in their own difficult wilderness seasons. He prays that the sovereign king send down immediate help from the ultimate sanctuary of heaven and grant an unyielding permanent support from the heights of Mount Zion, anchoring the fragile life of the faithful during times of absolute chaos. The king visualizes the divine evaluation of a life lived in uncompromised devotion, drawing comfort from the structural reliability of the covenant. May the Creator remember all your quiet sacrifices, he petitions, and accept the burnt offerings of your heart with joy. May he give you the deepest desires of your inner spirit and make all your strategic plans succeed in the open fields. He recognizes that true prosperity is not a random favor, but the natural outcome of a life that has been completely synchronized with the purposes of heaven. When our paths are aligned with the straight line of equity, our desires become a reflection of the divine will, and our success is fully guaranteed by the laws of the cosmos. He anticipates the glorious celebration that will inevitably crown this season of solitary testing, looking past his current exile to a future day of corporate victory. May we shout for joy over your magnificent triumph, he exclaims, his heart beginning to overflow with an unshakable permanent gladness, and lift up our banners in the majestic name of our God. May the Lord grant absolutely all your requests. He envisions a grand public square where the flags of the faithful are unfurled to the wind, serving as a permanent monument to the reliability of the divine promise. The song of the hidden fugitive will become the triumphant anthem of an entirely redeemed nation. Now this I know with absolute certainty. The Lord gives victory to his anointed king. The shepherd king brings his meditation to a powerful, decisive turning point, his voice gaining an unyielding authority that cuts through the lingering shadows of the night. He declares that his assurance is no longer a matter of human speculation or emotional hope. It has become a solid, unshakable knowledge anchored in his inner core. He knows that the Lord answers his chosen servant from his high heavenly sanctuary, executing a swift deliverance with the victorious, world-shaking power of his right hand. This single realization completely dismantles the pride of his pursuers, rendering their complex military conspiracies entirely useless before the throne of judgment. He exposes the absolute futility of the world's self-reliance, drawing a clear line of demarcation between the resources of the proud and the defense of the righteous. Some trust completely in the physical security of their chariots, and some place their absolute confidence in the strength of their war horses. He observes his words, stripping away the illusion of material dominance. But we trust implicitly in the matchless name of the Lord our God. He looks down at the historical stage, watching as the advanced military empires of the earth, with all their sophisticated iron weapons and their thousands of soldiers, are brought heavily to their knees and fall into the dust of defeat, while the humble family of faith rises up and stands permanently firm. The king steps closer to the edge of the cavern entrance, his face illuminated by the first pale gold rays of the new morning. He lifts his hands toward the vast sky, issuing a final triumphant shout of allegiance that echoes down through the winding limestone ravines. Lord, give victory to the king. Answer our cry whenever we call upon your name. He understands that his survival in the desert is already a recorded fact in the high halls of universal governance. He is no longer a victim waiting for an executioner. He is a preserved soul, standing firm on the bedrock of an eternal covenant that no human treachery can ever alter or destroy. The first golden beams of a spectacular new dawn burst over the jagged horizons of Judea, flooding the limestone cavern with a radiant celebratory light. The long, exhausting night of running, weeping, and hidden isolation has finally broken. The shepherd king stands at the mouth of his refuge, his posture erect, his eyes reflecting the brilliant landscape. The atmosphere of a damp prison has completely vanished, replaced by the unmistakable splendor of a royal throne room. The wilderness forge has completed its work, and the creative fire of the Holy Spirit prompts his tongue to move with absolute triumphant authority. The king rejoices in your strength, Lord. How great is his joy in the victories you give. He projects this grand declaration into the crisp morning air, his voice carrying the deep weight of a monarch who has outlasted the storm. He recognizes that his survival was not secured by human cleverness or the sharpness of his own sword, but by the unyielding intervention of the Almighty. He speaks of the spectacular reversal of his circumstances. The Creator has granted him the deepest desires of his heart and has not withheld the request of his lips. The Sovereign has come to meet him with rich, permanent blessings, placing a crown of pure, refined gold upon his head and validating his lineage before the entire nation. The poet king marks the eternal quality of this divine promotion, contrasting it with the fading, fragile regimes of earthly tyrants. He asked you for life, and you gave it to him, length of days forever and ever. Through the victories given by the Lord, the glory of the king is exceptionally great. The Master has clothed him with splendor and majesty. He has been granted a permanent, unshakable gladness in the immediate presence of the Most High. This is the ultimate reward of the wilderness. The king does not trust in the shifting loyalty of crowds, but anchors his heart implicitly in the unfailing love of the Almighty, ensuring he will never be shaken. Your hand will lay hold on all your enemies, your right hand will seize your foes. He visualizes the absolute dismantle of the deceptive systems that had sought his ruin. He sees the proud conspirators becoming like a blazing furnace when the Lord appears in his holy anger. The fire of divine equity will completely consume them, wiping their descendants from the face of the earth and erasing their treacherous legacy from among mankind. Though they plotted malicious schemes against the innocent and devised complex intrigues in their hidden chambers, their plans are turned into absolute vanity. The Lord will aim his glittering arrows directly at their faces, forcing them to turn back in total confusion. The shepherd king steps fully out of the cave, leaving the shadows of the cavern permanently behind him. He lifts his hands toward the blazing morning sky, issuing a final anthem of allegiance to his protector. Be exalted in your strength, Lord. We will sing and praise your power. He understands that he is no longer a fugitive, running from an executioner. He is a vindicated ruler, walking forward into a magnificent, sovereign destiny. The hunt is over, the covenant has prevailed, and the king rests in perfect, permanent tranquility. The Judean sun ascends to its highest peak, completely dissolving the final shadows of the limestone cavern into an ocean of brilliant, unyielding light. The long exile of the shepherd king has reached its ultimate fulfillment. He steps completely out of the dark stone refuge, leaving the dust of the wilderness behind his face, illuminated by the radiant glory of an eternal horizon. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? He speaks this definitive truth into the vast desert air, his voice carrying the quiet, absolute weight of a soul that has been permanently anchored in the character of the Creator. He realizes that the cave was never a prison of abandonment, but a sacred forge of destiny, where his spirit was stripped of human reliance to be clothed in divine power. The spears of his pursuers have lost their edge, and the conspiracies of the proud have collapsed into nothingness. Through every season of isolation, the faithfulness of the Almighty has stood as an immovable fortress. The wilderness has blossomed into a house of glory. The true King has spoken. The covenant has triumphed, and the soul rests in a perfect, permanent peace that no earthly storm can ever shake.